What if the story of human history you learned was never the beginning, but only the debris left after a far older truth was buried? Imagine a world where the archives of the most powerful spiritual institution on earth do not simply guard letters, treaties, and papal decrees, but fragments of humanity's forgotten origin, records so ancient they blur the line between myth and memory, so disruptive they were sealed not out of malice, but out of fear of what they might undo. Behind the quiet walls of Rome, past frescoed halls and echoing stone corridors, lies a vault that has shaped the world not by what it reveals, but by what it refuses to speak aloud. For centuries, whispers have circled those shelves like unsettled spirits, scrolls older than scripture, chronicles that describe floods predating all recorded civilizations, letters from explorers who reached unknown continents long before the age of discovery, manuscripts that hint, softly but unmistakably, that the rise of humanity did not follow a straight line, but a series of ascents and collapses erased by fire, water, and time. If even a fraction of those shadows were true, then everything we think we know about who we are, where we came from, and how many times the world has begun again would need to be rewritten. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And, as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. The Vatican sits at the heart of Rome, like a still-beating memory of the ancient world, a place where marble and shadow coexist, where footsteps echo through corridors designed to outlive the empires that once surrounded them. Tourists see columns, statues, and sunlight splashing across courtyards, but beneath that surface lies a vast, hidden architecture of secrecy. In that subterranean quiet, inside a vault sealed for centuries, stretches a labyrinth that few humans have ever entered. It is a terrain of dust-covered manuscripts, brittle scrolls, untranslatable fragments, political bargains, forgotten heresies, and stories written long before anyone called this place holy. The Vatican Secret Archives, despite the official renaming and cautious explanations, remain one of the most enigmatic repositories on Earth. People imagine shadows whispering across parchment, but the truth may be stranger than rumor. The silence of these shelves has shaped the story of humanity as surely as any king, conqueror, or prophet. The origins of this vault reach back not merely to the 17th century decree that consolidated its holdings, but to centuries before, when the Church was a wandering keeper of fragments. Long before Rome crowned itself the guardian of Christendom, bishops carried letters through collapsing empires, monks rescued manuscripts from burning libraries, and scholars copied texts by candlelight, preserving voices from worlds already turning to dust. These early efforts were not the coordinated archival mission we imagine today. They were acts of desperation and devotion, attempts to rescue meaning from chaos. As kingdoms fell, hordes of documents migrated, some by conquest, some by accident, others by divine chance, into the gravitational pull of the Church. Over time, this accumulation of fragile knowledge became the quiet backbone of a power structure that understood something few others did. Information is a kingdom of its own. By the 16th century, Europe was a tinderbox of revolutions, reformation, and discovery. Empires collided, beliefs were tested, old certainties cracked. In this chaos, Pope Paul V issued an order that would change the trajectory of historical memory. He commanded that all records belonging to the papacy, letters, treaties, chronicles, inquisitorial proceedings, imperial correspondence, be gathered, catalogued, and sealed behind locked doors. To many contemporaries, it seemed like an administrative move, a gesture of order in a world splintering apart. Yet the deeper implication was far more profound. From that moment, the Church decided that knowledge itself required protection, containment, and selective illumination. What the world would see and what it would never see again became two threads woven deliberately apart. Inside these walls, shelves stretch further than the eye can trace, kilometers of parchment arranged in a language of power. Some documents are mundane, chronicling the everyday machinery of faith and governance. Others are strange relics of worlds long dead, maps drawn from the accounts of explorers who vanished into unknown territories, letters from monarchs pleading for absolution or favor, treaties signed in candlelit rooms that determined the fate of continents. Inquisitorial records form another grim ledger, pages stained with confessions and testimonies gathered during an age when fear and certainty walked hand in hand. Some were written by trembling hands, others by scribes who recorded accusations as if documenting storms. These testimonies do not merely reveal guilt or innocence, they reveal entire cosmologies of belief, superstition, and desperation. They show how societies fracture in the face of the unknown. But beyond all this is the whisper that refuses to die. The possibility that the archives contain manuscripts older than the Church, older even than the empires that nurtured it. Stories persist of scrolls acquired from crumbling temples in Alexandria, of papyri carried by fleeing scholars after the fall of Constantinople, of tablets taken by crusaders and delivered to Rome as trophies or bribes. These documents, if they exist, would not simply challenge the timeline of civilization. They would rewrite it. Some speak of Egyptian records describing dynasties stretching back to ages lost beneath the desert sands. Others hint at Babylonian accounts of floods and celestial events predating biblical chronology by centuries or millennia. Such claims remain unverified, unwitnessed, and unacknowledged. Yet their persistence through generations reveals a deeper truth. Wherever secrecy prevails, imagination fills the void with ancient thunder. Travelers of the Enlightenment era speculated flamboyantly about what might truly lie beyond the Vatican's barred thresholds. Some believed the archives held the missing books of the Roman historian Livy, which would provide a raw, unfiltered portrait of Rome's forgotten epochs. Others whispered about letters exchanged between emperors and popes, documenting alliances the world was never meant to know. A few dared to imagine manuscripts that described civilizations predating the rise of known history, accounts of temples swallowed by oceans or kingdoms erased by cosmic fire. Skeptics dismissed such fantasies as the inventions of restless minds. Yet time and again, accidental discoveries have shown how easily history can be lost, and how easily it might also be recovered. What makes the archives so mysterious is not the claim that they contain wonders, but the fact that the Church admits only fragments of their contents exist for public study. Access was nearly impossible for centuries, restricted to a handful of scholars deemed trustworthy. Even after limited admissions began in the late 19th century, researchers were allowed to see only what the Vatican chose to reveal. They could not roam shelves freely, nor search according to their own instincts. Documents were requested like wishes, and the archivists determined which wishes could be granted. This choreography of control created an aura more tantalizing than any confirmed secret. The idea that behind every opened box lies a dozen unopened ones, and behind each sealed shelf lies an entire unwritten chapter of the human story. Rumors multiplied because silence invites speculation. One widely repeated tale speaks of an internal catalog, a list of contents considered too sensitive, too disorienting, or too dangerous to permit outside eyes. According to this rumor, the catalog included titles such as On the Origins of Man and Treatises from the Ancients, but no scholar has ever confirmed its existence. Perhaps it was nothing more than a phantom conjured by imagination. Or perhaps it was real, but burned, hidden, or renamed to mislead anyone listening too closely. In the world of sealed knowledge, truth and myth share the same architecture. There are other stories, too, stranger and more offbeat, but no less persistent. A 1920s claim from a group of Italian journalists insisted that a locked chamber in the archives held letters from mythical kings, correspondence impossible to date, impossible to classify, yet written in hands that resembled scripts found in temples long turned to rubble. The Church dismissed this as fantasy, and perhaps it was. But every denial only deepened the sense that these archives, these miles of parchment and dust, might be a theater of secrets not yet ready for daylight. The archives hold more than theological memory. They also reflect the evolution of human fear and curiosity. As Europe encountered new worlds, missionaries returned with letters describing civilizations the West had never imagined. Some accounts dazzled, others troubled. Jesuit scholars in China reported astronomical knowledge surpassing Europe's understanding. Missionaries in the Americas described empires rising from jungles with stonework as precise as anything in Rome. These letters traveled back across oceans, often landing in papal hands. Some were shared. Others were quietly stored, perhaps because they complicated the narrative of Europe as the apex of human development. Even within the Church, disciplines collided. Consider the case of Galileo. His trial transcripts preserved in the archives show not only theological concerns, but political pressure, personal conflict, and the uncomfortable truth that institutions often fear change, not because it is wrong, but because it is uncontrollable. Behind the scenes, other documents may reveal additional layers, support of cardinals, secret doubts, or calculations too delicate to survive public scrutiny. What survives in official histories is a sanitized portrait. What survives in the archives is something else entirely. The raw mechanics of an age wrestling with knowledge that threatened to upend its carefully constructed worldview. The idea that the archives contain secrets about lost civilizations arises not from fantasy, but from the very nature of historical loss. Consider the burning of libraries across antiquity, the collapse of empires, the dissolution of cultures. Each catastrophe scattered texts like ashes, some drifting into monasteries, some into private collections, and some perhaps into papal hands. Stories of Atlantis, Lemuria, or sunken kingdoms might be myths, but their persistence across cultures suggests that ancient peoples held memories of real catastrophes, floods swallowing coastlines at the end of the Ice Age, volcanic eruptions collapsing entire societies, meteor strikes turning night into day. If missionaries or travelers recorded accounts of these memories, such writings could easily have ended up in Rome, where they may still rest, unidentified or deliberately sealed away. The archive's power lies not only in what they contain, but in what they imply. They form a parallel timeline of humanity, a second draft of history written in documents that never made it into public narrative. To scholars who study them, the archives are a humbling reminder that recorded history is not the sum of what happened, only the sum of what survived, what was allowed, what someone thought the future should remember. To those kept outside, the archives represent possibility itself, the chance that truths long buried may yet return, reshaping the contours of civilization. And so the vaults remain sealed, their secrets protected by walls thicker than stone. Tradition, caution, fear, responsibility, and the quiet understanding that once knowledge escapes into the world, it can never be contained again. The Vatican's silence is not merely absence, it is its own kind of testimony. It suggests that the line between myth and history may be thinner than we believe, and that somewhere behind those locked doors lies a story older, darker, and far more intricate than the one we tell ourselves when we trust the surface of things. In the end, the archives are less a place than a question. They are a threshold between the world we think we know and the world that may have existed before memory hardened into history. They invite us to imagine that hidden among the dust and shadows, manuscripts wait like dormant seeds, carrying the forgotten truths of civilizations lost, catastrophes survived, and knowledge forbidden. And whether those manuscripts confirm our deepest suspicions or dismantle them entirely, the fact remains. Until the doors open fully, the greatest secret of the Vatican is not what it hides, but why it hides it at all. If the Vatican's archives are a vast reservoir of hidden memory, then one of the most tantalizing streams feeding into that reservoir is the possibility that they harbor manuscripts far older than the religion they came to guard. The idea persists, not because of any confession from Rome, but because history itself leaves fractures, gaps where entire civilizations, philosophies, and worldviews vanished almost overnight. In those gaps lie questions. Where did their writings go? Who rescued them? And why do certain fragments, written in voices that no longer belong to any living culture, appear mysteriously in European collections centuries after their supposed destruction? When scholars trace the migration of ancient texts from Alexandria, Babylon, Persia, and Greece across collapsing empires, the trail often ends in the same place: Rome. Whether this is coincidence, convenience, or a silent truth buried beneath layers of secrecy is a matter that continues to haunt historians. To understand this possibility, one must look beyond neat textbook narratives and into the chaotic realities of antiquity. Before the Vatican ever existed, the Mediterranean world was a swirling exchange of ideas, trade routes, conquests, and philosophical networks that crossed deserts, seas, and borders. When Rome absorbed this world into its empire, it inherited not just territory, but libraries, temple records, scientific treatises, royal chronicles, astronomical observations, medical manuals, and philosophical dialogues. Many of these collections survived only in partial form. Others disappeared entirely. Fires consumed palaces, wars toppled archives, scribes fled cities with nothing but a few precious scrolls clutched beneath their robes. Yet somehow, despite all this destruction, certain works resurfaced centuries later, preserved in monasteries or private collections, sometimes in Europe, sometimes in Asia, and sometimes in the hands of the Church at Rome. The fall of Alexandria's great library remains one of the most mythologized episodes in human memory, a symbol of how fragile knowledge truly is. Over centuries, waves of fire and conflict erased an archive of mind-blowing scale. Tens of thousands of scrolls, from astronomical charts to philosophical theories, from maps of unknown coastlines to records of civilizations lost even in their own time. Ancient writers spoke of scholars who attempted to rescue whatever they could, loading carts with scrolls and fleeing into the night. Some journeys ended in oblivion, others ended in monasteries, ports, caravans, or distant cities. The idea that certain Alexandrian texts reached Rome is not impossible. After all, Rome commanded trade routes across the entire Mediterranean, and scholars traveled freely between cities, sometimes seeking patronage, sometimes fleeing persecution. If even a handful of rescued manuscripts found their way onto Roman ships, they could easily have been absorbed into private libraries, imperial archives, or early Christian collections that later became part of the Vatican's holdings. One particularly evocative rumor speaks of papyri carried from Egypt by an early bishop during a period of religious tension. These papyri supposedly described a sequence of dynasties that stretched far beyond the timelines recognized in later biblical interpretations, linking catastrophic floods, migrations, and astronomical events into a chronology that would have challenged the theological world of late antiquity. Such stories might sound fantastical, but fragments of unusual documents have indeed surfaced over the centuries. Some reference kings whose names appear nowhere else, others describe rituals or cosmological beliefs preserved only in shadowy scraps. While none of these fragments have been proven to originate from Alexandria's lost treasures, the possibility that similar material lies sealed in Rome has fueled curiosity for generations. Equally compelling is the story of Constantinople. When the eastern capital of the Roman Empire fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453, scholars fled with whatever they could salvage. Manuscripts long thought lost suddenly re-emerged in Italy, sparking intellectual revolutions that reshaped Europe. Entire philosophical traditions resurfaced from the ashes of Byzantium, bringing with them commentaries that illuminated forgotten schools of thought. If treasures like these emerged from the chaos of one city's fall, how many others vanished quietly into private collections or religious institutions, their origins obscured by time? Some historians argue that Rome, with its established networks of clerics, diplomats, and merchants, would have been a natural destination for such materials, especially those dealing with theology, astrology, medicine, or political strategy. Whether these manuscripts were displayed openly or filed away in locked rooms is a question that none outside the Vatican can answer. The migration of ancient knowledge through war is not limited to Alexandria or Constantinople. Consider the Fourth Crusade in 1204, when Crusaders sacked Byzantium with devastating force. Libraries were looted, relics stolen, and countless manuscripts carried westward as spoils of war. Some were sold, some lost, and some given as gifts to powerful institutions seeking legitimacy or favor. There are accounts, tantalizing but incomplete, of clerics delivering crates of Byzantine writings to the papacy for safekeeping. These consignments supposedly included astronomical tables, philosophical commentaries, and chronicles describing the rise and fall of forgotten empires. Whether such records survived intact, whether they were translated, copied, or sealed, or whether they were destroyed for contradicting emerging theological norms, remains one of the more provocative mysteries surrounding the archives. Equally intriguing are the tales of early Christian scribes who copied pagan works not to preserve them, but to refute them. In order to challenge rival beliefs, they needed to understand those beliefs intimately. Thus, manuscripts by philosophers, temple priests, or astronomers who lived centuries before Christ may have been copied within monasteries and eventually collected by bishops. Over time, these materials, some condemned as heretical, others merely outdated, could have been stored away quietly, never intended for public eyes, but never destroyed either. In this way, the Church may have inadvertently become one of the greatest custodians of antiquity, preserving documentation that otherwise would have vanished in the collapse of empires. Among the most speculative categories of rumored manuscripts are the so-called Sibylline texts, ancient prophetic writings supposedly consulted by Roman emperors in times of crisis. The originals were said to have burned in antiquity, yet whispers persist that fragments were copied by early Christian scholars who sought to recontextualize pagan prophecies through a theological lens. Whether any such fragments survive today remains unverified, but their mere possibility lights the imagination. A prophecy describing the rise and fall of civilizations, preserved in a sealed Vatican vault, is precisely the type of narrative that fuels both scholarly debate and public fascination. Another thread woven into the tapestry of ancient knowledge involves the early centuries of Christianity itself. The Mediterranean world was teeming with competing philosophies, mystery cults, and spiritual traditions. Gnostic communities, for instance, produced their own gospels, symbolic, mystical texts that diverged sharply from the narratives later canonized by the Church. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt in 1945 revealed how easily entire landscapes of belief can be buried and forgotten for millennia. If such manuscripts survived undisturbed in desert caves, what might have survived in more protected institutions? Some scholars speculate that the Vatican holds additional early Christian writings deemed too heterodox to circulate, sealed away to protect the unity of doctrine. These might include alternate portrayals of Jesus' life, esoteric teachings given privately to specific disciples, or accounts of early Christian communities whose theology would be unrecognizable to modern believers. Tales from medieval Europe add further layers of intrigue. In monasteries across the continent, monks copied texts tirelessly, sometimes adding their own interpretations or marginal notes that hinted at personal doubts or secret knowledge. Their libraries were vulnerable, susceptible to fire, raids, political upheaval. But some manuscripts were sent to Rome for safekeeping. These often included chronicles written in obscure dialects, describing celestial events, strange omens, or encounters with peoples whose cultures vanished long before historians began their work. A monk in Ireland might record a tale passed down through generations about a flood that reshaped the land. A chronicler in Italy might describe a devastating firestorm believed to be divine punishment. These narratives, fragmented as they were, could represent genuine memories of ancient catastrophes distilled through centuries of retelling. If such documents reached the Vatican, they may still exist, silent witnesses to epochs of trauma and renewal. The archive's mystique only deepens when one considers the possibility that they hold documents not just from the ancient Mediterranean, but from ancient worlds scattered across the globe. Jesuit missionaries in Asia, Africa, and the Americas returned with detailed observations about cultures whose histories stretched far beyond European understanding. Some wrote of astronomical systems more precise than European models. Others described oral traditions recounting migrations, disappearances, or cataclysms thousands of years older than Western timelines. These letters may have challenged prevailing theological frameworks, and thus their circulation may have been restricted. If missionaries encountered indigenous accounts of great floods, skyborne fire, or lost cities swallowed by forest or sea, their reports may have been filed away under the category of ethnographic curiosity and gradually absorbed into the archives. Over time, such accounts could form a mosaic of human memory. Pieces scattered across continents, but collected, intentionally or not, into one of the most secretive vaults on Earth. One particularly strange but persistent rumor describes a manuscript obtained by a papal envoy returning from Egypt centuries ago. This envoy supposedly brought with him a series of papyri describing an ancient dynasty that ruled before the mythical flood remembered in so many cultures. The papyri allegedly spoke of a kingdom destroyed by rising waters and fire from the sky. Imagery eerily consistent with stories from Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, and the Pacific. According to the rumor, the envoy delivered the scrolls to Rome, where they disappeared into the archives, never to be seen again. Whether this story has any basis in fact is impossible to determine, but it reflects a broader pattern. Time and again, ancient narratives contain echoes of real geological events: massive floods triggered by melting glaciers, volcanic eruptions that darkened the sky, meteor impacts that unleashed devastation. If the Vatican preserved eyewitness accounts or ancient traditions describing such events, they could offer a rare glimpse into humanity's earliest attempts to understand its own fragility. Historians often caution against reading too much into these whispers. They argue that no institution could possibly hide knowledge of this magnitude without leaving traces. But the archives have always challenged conventional thinking, because secrecy itself shapes the way people interpret absence. When scholars cannot view the full collection, they are left to navigate rumors, fragments, and circumstantial evidence. And in that space of uncertainty, even the most fantastical claims acquire a strange kind of plausibility. What truly sustains the mythology of the archives is not the promise that they contain definitive answers, but the tantalizing suggestion that they contain possibilities. They represent the idea that humanity's story is not linear, not complete, not fully understood. They remind us that for every history written, another may have been lost. For every empire remembered, another may have been erased. And for every manuscript preserved in the Vatican's quiet vaults, countless others are scattered beneath oceans, deserts, and ruins. Whether the archives hold scrolls from Alexandria, papyri from lost dynasties, fragments from vanished civilizations, or manuscripts that challenge the boundaries of known history, one truth persists. The human desire to uncover what lies beyond the horizon of memory is as old as civilization itself. The archives feed that desire not by revealing their contents, but by withholding them. In their silence, they whisper a haunting invitation to question, to wonder, and to imagine the vastness of what might still remain unseen beneath the weight of centuries. If the Vatican's vaults truly cradle manuscripts older than Christianity, then among the most provocative categories whispered about in their shadows are the so-called hidden Gospels, texts written by early followers of Jesus or by communities shaped by radically different interpretations of his teachings. The very phrase hidden Gospels suggests a parallel Christianity, a discontinued branch of memory that might illuminate how diverse, disputed, and fluid the earliest decades of the faith truly were. These rumors persist not because people crave scandal, but because history itself reveals a landscape far more complex than the polished canon suggests. Before the four Gospels were gathered into the form known today, dozens, perhaps hundreds of narratives circulated across the Mediterranean. Some were poetic, some mystical, some symbolic, and some shockingly direct. Many vanished under the weight of theological consolidation. Some were destroyed deliberately, others survived through luck. And a few, many believe, may survive because they were quietly sheltered in an archive built to keep dangerous ideas both preserved and contained. To understand why such writings inspire endless speculation, one must imagine Christianity before Christianity, before councils, doctrines, creeds, or institutions. In the 1st and 2nd centuries, followers of Jesus lived in scattered communities with distinct customs, languages, and philosophies. Their memories of him were shaped not just by what they believed, but by where they lived, what they feared, and how they interpreted revelation. A fisherman in Judea might recall teachings about justice and restoration. A mystic in Alexandria might emphasize symbolism and cosmic insight. A community in Antioch might record teachings that sounded political, charged with conflict. These divergent voices gave rise to an abundance of manuscripts, gospels, letters, dialogues, hymns, each reflecting a facet of a movement still discovering itself. When later church leaders sought unity, that abundance became a liability. The canon we know today emerged not as a neutral portrait of early Christianity, but as a carefully curated narrative designed to unify a rapidly expanding faith. That curation process inevitably created shadows. The Gnostic texts discovered in Nag Hammadi in 1945 revealed a world of Christian thought that had survived in silence for nearly 2 millennia. These writings, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary, offered interpretations so different they seemed almost like an alternate universe, a Jesus who teaches through riddles, who emphasizes self-discovery over obedience, who suggests the divine spark can be awakened within every person. If such manuscripts lay hidden in clay jars for 1,600 years, the question arises, could others, equally ancient, have been preserved more intentionally by institutions with both motive and means? Could the Vatican, with its centuries of collecting, archiving, and enforcing doctrinal unity, possess manuscripts that survived not by accident but by design? One of the most persistent rumors involves a text known as the Gospel of Judas, a manuscript describing Judas not as a betrayer, but as the sole disciple who understood Jesus' true purpose. The version discovered and released publicly in the 2000s stunned scholars, not because it rewrote Christianity, but because early church fathers had mentioned such a manuscript in their own writings. They had condemned it as heresy, yet clearly it had circulated widely enough to warrant such condemnation. If one copy survived buried in desert sands, could another, perhaps older, perhaps more complete, rest in the Vatican's archives? Scholars cannot say. The Church remains silent on whether it holds any similar texts. But silence, when paired with documented precedent, becomes fuel for speculation. Another manuscript rumored to exist within the archives is the Gospel of Barnabas, a text that portrays Jesus not as divine, but as a prophetic figure whose arrival fulfills earlier revelations. The versions available today date to the medieval period and contain linguistic features that complicate claims of authenticity. Yet some scholars argue that these medieval versions may represent copies of a far older tradition. According to whispers passed through academic circles, there may once have been an earlier manuscript, older, more coherent, submitted to the Vatican for examination. Whether it was judged heretical, lost, or quietly archived remains unknown. The Vatican neither confirms nor denies any such history. Then there is the elusive Gospel of Eve, mentioned by early theologians as belonging to a mystical sect whose interpretations pushed beyond the boundaries of acceptable doctrine. No full copy has ever surfaced, but in the 19th century, a scholar claimed he glimpsed fragments of a manuscript in Rome that bore uncanny resemblance to descriptions of this lost text. He later admitted that he was shown the fragment only briefly, as though the archivist wished to prove a point without granting permission to study it. This anecdote is impossible to verify, yet it persists because it aligns with a familiar pattern. Manuscripts that challenge orthodoxy are preserved just long enough to document their existence, yet concealed to prevent them from influencing the faithful. We must remember that the early Church collected so-called heretical writings not because it valued them, but because it needed to refute them. To argue against a text, one must know its contents. This created a paradoxical legacy. By attempting to suppress competing narratives, the Church inadvertently preserved them. Over centuries, these manuscripts may have accumulated, passed from bishop to bishop, monastery to monastery, until they eventually entered the papal collections. Whether they remain there today is a question without an official answer. Consider, too, the political dimensions of canon formation. The unification of Christian scripture was not merely a spiritual endeavor, it was a geopolitical one. A fragmented faith could fracture empires. A unified canon could stabilize them. Writings that presented Jesus as primarily mystical, philosophical, or symbolic could undermine the authority of emerging institutions. Texts that elevated women, advocated radical equality, or challenged hierarchical structures could destabilize early Christian governance. Such manuscripts would have been seen as threats to coherence. The Vatican, inheritor of centuries of consolidation, thus became the natural place where such threats might be sent, labeled, preserved, sealed. Beyond theological concerns lies another category of hidden gospel: manuscripts that challenge the historical timeline of Christianity itself. Some rumors refer to documents describing Jesus traveling east after the resurrection, perhaps interacting with communities in India or Central Asia. These accounts echo faintly in certain traditions, though they remain unsubstantiated. A Jesuit missionary in Ethiopia reportedly encountered a local gospel describing Jesus in ways unfamiliar to Western theology. According to the missionary, he forwarded notes to Rome. What became of them after that remains a mystery. Did the manuscript contradict doctrine too strongly? Was it deemed folklore? Or was it filed away alongside other ethnographic curiosities, left untranslated and forgotten? There are also tales of manuscripts describing early Christian encounters with cultures whose histories extend deep into antiquity. Some speak of scrolls written in Syriac or Coptic, containing parables not found in any known gospel. Others hint at letters exchanged between early Christian leaders and kings of distant lands, Ethiopia, Persia, Armenia, suggesting a web of influence far more intricate than mainstream history imagines. These accounts remain speculative, but they resonate with historical reality. Christianity did spread rapidly along trade routes. It did encounter philosophies ranging from Stoicism to Zoroastrianism. It did adapt, borrow, and debate as it grew. If such interactions produced writings, they may exist in Rome. Hidden Gospels, if they exist, could reveal not just different memories of Jesus, but entirely different conceptions of salvation, morality, and cosmology. Some texts emphasize inner awakening rather than external obedience. Others portray Jesus as imparting secret teachings to a select few, suggesting layers of meaning intended only for those capable of deeper comprehension. Still others challenge the notion that revelation stopped with the apostles. Such ideas would have been destabilizing, especially in eras when the Church sought to define itself firmly against rivals. To preserve such manuscripts, yet restrict them, reflects a distinct method of control, acknowledging their existence while neutralizing their influence. But the most haunting aspect of the hidden gospel theory lies not in the content of these manuscripts, but in the quiet logic of institutional preservation. The Vatican, for all its secrecy, has rarely destroyed knowledge outright. Its scholars, copying texts through centuries of turmoil, understood that even dangerous ideas held historical value. Thus, the archives may contain writings collected not because they were cherished, but because they were feared. Refuting heresy required documentation. Understanding rivals required reading their words. Preserving the past, even the forbidden past, was a way of protecting the Church's authority. If ancient Gospels lie buried within the Vatican, they would not be stored as sacred truths. They would likely rest inside plain boxes, labeled in faded Latin, their pages brittle, their significance immense yet deliberately muted. A simple annotation, apocryphal, heretical, non-canonical, could relegate a gospel to obscurity for centuries. Scholars requesting materials might never know such documents exist unless guided by an archivist who knows exactly what to reveal and what to withhold. This is how silence functions in powerful institutions, not as absence, but as direction. The story the world hears is shaped as much by what remains hidden as by what is spoken. Speculation around hidden gospels often intersects with rumors of even stranger documents, letters, diaries, or testimonies written by early followers who witnessed miracles, cosmic events, or encounters that defy modern interpretation. Some accounts describe luminous phenomena in the sky. Others speak of prophetic dreams recorded with unsettling specificity. These manuscripts may have been collected during inquisitions or missionary journeys, judged too mystical for public theology, yet too intriguing to discard. Their language, archaic and symbolic, could easily be misread by later generations as evidence of supernatural beings or extraterrestrial contact. Whether these interpretations hold any merit is irrelevant. What matters is that such documents reflect the raw spiritual imagination of early believers. They reveal a world where divine and earthly realms blurred constantly, where visions were real experiences, and where the boundaries of interpretation were far wider than those permitted by later doctrine. This leads to another provocative possibility, that the Vatican may hold manuscripts describing early Christian interactions with groups whose beliefs predate the Church by millennia. Accounts of Egyptian priests referencing cosmic cycles, Babylonian astronomers predicting celestial alignments, or Greek philosophers describing transcendent experiences may have entered Christian discourse through early converts or travelers. Such manuscripts, blending cultures, would be politically dangerous in eras when Christianity sought to assert primacy. Yet the Church may have preserved them precisely because they offered insight into how ancient wisdom traditions converged with emerging Christian theology. Even more controversial are whispers of Gospels describing Jesus' childhood or missing years between adolescence and ministry. These narratives, whether historical or mythical, could illuminate aspects of his identity that remain obscure. Some manuscripts discovered outside the Vatican, such as the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, present stories that feel unfamiliar to modern Christians. Others, mentioned in ancient writings but never recovered, may portray Jesus as a world traveler, a seeker of wisdom, or a figure engaged in dialogues with sages beyond Judea. Whether factual or symbolic, such texts would complicate the canonical portrait and may therefore have been quietly safeguarded. At the heart of the hidden gospel mystery is a simple yet profound truth. When an institution becomes the guardian of history, it also becomes the guardian of its omissions. The Vatican, with its centuries of intellectual stewardship, carries both burdens. If lost gospels exist in its vaults, they are more than theological curiosities. They are windows into forgotten worlds, reminders that belief systems evolve through conflict, diversity, and experimentation. They challenge the idea of a singular, uniform Christianity and reveal instead a mosaic of voices, some harmonious, some discordant, all part of a larger human struggle to understand the divine. The haunting question is not whether these Gospels exist, but what their existence would mean. Would they dismantle faith or deepen it? Would they reveal contradictions or confirm suspicions long held by scholars? Or would they simply broaden our understanding of a movement that emerged not in clarity, but in complexity? The archives, sealed and silent, keep these questions alive by refusing to answer them. And so the rumors continue. Fragments glimpsed briefly, manuscripts referenced in footnotes, scholars whispering about boxes they were not permitted to open. Whether these stories reflect truth or imagination hardly matters. They reveal the enduring human desire to reclaim lost origins, to peer behind the veil of official history, to encounter the raw, unfiltered voices of those who lived in a world where revelation was not a closed book, but an unfolding mystery. In the silence of the archives, those voices wait, not erased, not forgotten, but held in tension between secrecy and survival, guarding secrets that may yet redefine the boundaries of faith and history. If hidden gospels invite questions about suppressed origins, then the rumors surrounding the Vatican's vaults take an even stranger turn when the subject shifts from theology to forbidden science. For centuries, Europe lived in a tense dance between curiosity and fear, discovery and orthodoxy, illumination and shadow. The Church was not an enemy of knowledge, far from it. It funded universities, preserved manuscripts, and nurtured scholars. But it also policed the boundaries of what humanity was permitted to explore. Cross those boundaries, and a thinker might find himself facing charges not of ignorance, but of heresy. That delicate tension formed a historical environment where certain forms of knowledge, alchemy, early mechanics, esoteric astronomy, and radical medicine, were studied, debated, feared, or concealed. Over centuries, this mosaic of restricted curiosity fed a speculation that refuses to die, that the Vatican archives preserve humanity's most disruptive scientific manuscripts, not destroyed, but quietly locked away to prevent misuse or misunderstanding. To understand why such rumors persist, one must first grasp the intellectual atmosphere of the Renaissance, an era often romanticized as a joyful reawakening, but in truth marked by profound anxiety. Ancient Greek manuscripts re-emerged from forgotten corners of Byzantium. Arabic texts on mathematics, optics, and chemistry flowed into Europe through Spain and southern Italy. Scholars found themselves confronting sophisticated knowledge systems that challenged centuries of inherited assumptions. They were dazzled and terrified. Concepts like heliocentrism, advanced metallurgy, surgical techniques, and mathematical abstractions were exhilarating yet destabilizing in a world where theology served as the scaffolding for understanding reality. If older civilizations had mastered sciences Europe barely comprehended, what else might they have known? Did their achievements align with biblical chronology? Or did they suggest a deeper, longer, more complex human past? The Renaissance was a revolution of learning, but also a revelation of how much had been lost. Consider the case of alchemy, a discipline that straddled the line between mystical philosophy and primitive chemistry. In Islamic lands, alchemists documented their experiments extensively, studying distillation, mineral reactions, the properties of acids, and the transformations of metals. These manuscripts, when translated into Latin, captivated European scholars and monarchs alike. Some rulers sought alchemical knowledge for spiritual insight. Others pursued it for the promise of gold or eternal life. The Church viewed alchemy with suspicion, not because it was inherently evil, but because it granted individuals a sense of power outside ecclesiastical authority. A monk working alone in a dim chamber with unknown substances could produce miracles that felt dangerously close to sorcery. And yet, alchemical manuscripts were not always destroyed. Confiscated texts often made their way to clerical libraries. Some were studied to better refute their claims. Others were preserved as evidence of heretical tendencies or as warnings against intellectual hubris. Over centuries, scholars and inquisitors forwarded such works to Rome. The archive, by absorbing these fragments, became a kind of accidental museum of forbidden experimentation. One persistent rumor involves a set of alchemical codices confiscated during the Spanish Inquisition, describing not only the transmutation of metals, but also formulas for complex alloys, medicinal compounds, and dyes that produced colors unknown in medieval Europe. The manuscripts were said to be written in a mixture of Arabic, Latin, and cryptic symbols. Scholars debated whether they represented advanced metallurgy or mere fantasy. According to the rumor, the codices were deemed too disruptive to circulate and were sent to Rome for safekeeping. Whether they still exist remains one of those questions that hover at the edge of plausibility. neither fully believable nor fully dismissible. Equally tantalizing are whispers of manuscripts describing early mechanics, inventions centuries ahead of their time. Medieval Europe was not devoid of mechanical innovation. Water wheels, astronomical clocks, and siege engines were sophisticated feats of engineering. But rumors circulate of devices far more advanced: perpetual motion machines sketched by anonymous inventors, steam-powered engines centuries before industrialization, complicated lenses and mirrors capable of amplifying light in strange ways. One story, often retold though never verified, claims that a German monk constructed a primitive glider capable of sustained flight and documented his process in a manuscript later seized by church officials. According to the tale, the manuscript was deemed too dangerous, not because flight was evil, but because it represented knowledge without supervision. The document supposedly vanished into the archives, leaving behind only fragments of legend. There is also the matter of astronomy, a field that repeatedly collided with theology. Long before Copernicus, Greek and Persian astronomers proposed models of the cosmos that placed the sun, not Earth, at the center. Many of these works were preserved in Arabic manuscripts that eventually crossed into Europe. They described planetary motions with mathematical precision, noted anomalies in celestial cycles, and hinted at an understanding of cosmic structure that exceeded medieval norms. When Copernicus refined these ideas into a coherent heliocentric model, he dedicated his work to the Pope. The Church did not immediately condemn the theory, yet the confrontation with Galileo, a man whose telescopic observations made the heavens feel frighteningly real, became a testament to how volatile scientific revelation could be when it destabilized existing frameworks. Galileo saw moons orbiting Jupiter, evidence that Earth was not the universe's anchor. He observed phases of Venus contradicting geocentric doctrine. He mapped craters and mountains on the moon, defying the notion of celestial perfection. The transcripts of his trial remain preserved within the Vatican's archives, providing a chilling window into how knowledge becomes a battlefield. Yet beyond the official documents, scholars whisper of additional materials: correspondence between cardinals expressing private doubts, early drafts of Galileo's arguments annotated by his supporters, or even astronomical treatises too radical to circulate publicly. Whether these documents exist is uncertain, but they reflect a broader historical reality. Scientific progress has always been entangled with power. New discoveries threaten existing authority structures, and institutions respond by shaping, containing, or suppressing the flow of information. The Church also grappled with manuscripts describing medicine that contradicted accepted doctrine. Ancient medical texts from Alexandria, India, and the Islamic world described surgical procedures, anatomical insights, and medicinal plants that medieval Europe had never encountered. Some manuscripts even described forms of contraception or abortion, topics the Church approached with moral caution. According to scattered accounts, certain texts were confiscated and locked away, not destroyed. The reasoning was pragmatic. Even forbidden knowledge held value for scholars who needed to understand it in order to combat or contextualize it. A manuscript describing surgical instruments far more sophisticated than anything available in medieval Europe would challenge assumptions about human progress. Did such instruments exist? Were ancient civilizations more advanced than previously believed? If so, what did that say about humanity's place in sacred history? Another category of rumored manuscripts includes descriptions of lost technologies, ideas that flickered briefly into existence only to vanish. During the Renaissance, inventors sketched machines that would not reappear until centuries later. Flying devices resembling helicopters, armored vehicles, mechanical calculators. These sketches raise a haunting possibility. What if earlier civilizations recorded similar ideas? What if manuscripts describing advanced engineering circulated in secret circles, then disappeared, leaving behind only vague references or fantastical retellings? If such manuscripts survived, the Vatican would have been a logical destination for them, especially if they threatened political or theological stability. The Index of Forbidden Books, often misunderstood as a blacklist of dangerous knowledge, provides further context. The index did not burn every book it condemned. In many cases, the works were preserved for internal study. Manuscripts by scientists, philosophers, or mystics were stored rather than destroyed. This created an intellectual paradox. The Church became both censor and archivist, suppressing ideas publicly while preserving them privately. It is within this paradox that rumors of hidden scientific manuscripts gain traction. Consider the possibility of early astronomical observations describing celestial events now interpreted through a modern lens as supernovae, comets, or atmospheric anomalies. Medieval chronicles often describe fiery objects streaking across the sky, stars that danced or split in two, or glowing spheres hovering above cities. While many of these accounts exist openly, others may have been documented by church investigators and then archived. What a medieval chronicler described as a heavenly sign might today be seen as an astronomical event or even a phenomenon that defies easy classification. If investigators collected testimonies, drawings, or calculations, those materials could still be preserved somewhere deep within the shelves. Another rumor touches on forbidden mathematics. As Europe rediscovered Greek geometry and Arabic algebra, certain mathematical concepts, particularly those relating to infinity, irrational numbers, or abstract logic, were seen as destabilizing to theological arguments. Manuscripts describing these theories may have been studied cautiously, annotated by cautious scholars, and then stored away. Not because math was evil, but because unchecked abstraction posed philosophical challenges. Did infinity belong solely to God? Could humans manipulate infinite series without trespassing into metaphysical territory? These were not trivial concerns in an age when every intellectual pursuit was intertwined with spirituality. There is also the theme of ancient energy sources. Claims that long-lost manuscripts described natural forces humanity would not understand until centuries later. Some stories refer to devices powered by steam, sunlight, or magnetism. Others describe chemical reactions capable of generating sustained heat or light. Historians generally dismiss these tales as misinterpretations of technical drawings. Yet it is undeniable that ancient civilizations possessed technologies that remain poorly understood today. Greek fire, Roman concrete, and Damascus steel being among the most famous examples. If manuscripts explaining these techniques survived into the medieval period, the Church would have regarded them as valuable historical artifacts, but also potentially dangerous. But perhaps the most persistent rumor concerns manuscripts describing inventions that could have altered the trajectory of human development. Documents outlining theoretical machines or processes that, if revealed at the wrong time, might have triggered social upheaval. A society unprepared for disruptive technology could collapse under the weight of its implications. Thus, secrecy becomes a form of stewardship. Conceal knowledge until the world is ready. Whether such manuscripts exist is less important than what their rumors signify. The belief that humanity has always been more capable, more curious, and more interconnected than the official story acknowledges. The Vatican Archives symbolize a threshold between eras of knowledge, a place where the boundary between ancient science and modern understanding remains blurred. They remind us that history is not just a chronicle of what humanity learned, but also of what it feared to learn too quickly. If forbidden scientific manuscripts lie buried within those vaults, they are not simply relics of curiosity. They are signs of humanity's ongoing struggle with the unknown. They reveal a world where discovery was both celebrated and feared, where genius and heresy walked hand in hand, and where institutions carried the impossible burden of deciding which truths the world was ready to hear. And perhaps that is the deeper mystery. Not whether the Vatican hides dangerous knowledge, but whether it hides the possibility that human civilization has risen and fallen in complexity many times before, leaving behind only fragments, some in ruins, some in deserts, some in the hands of explorers, and perhaps some on the shelves of a silent, shadowed archive in the heart of Rome. If whispers of forbidden science stir unease, then the rumors that the Vatican Archives might contain records of lost civilizations strike at something deeper. An ache in humanity's collective memory, a suspicion that our story is far older and far more cyclical than modern timelines allow. Every continent holds ruins no one fully understands, myths that echo across cultures with uncanny similarity, and geological scars pointing to catastrophes powerful enough to erase entire chapters of history. The notion that the Vatican, positioned for centuries as a global receiver of information from missionaries, explorers, scholars, and kings, might possess manuscripts describing these forgotten worlds is not merely sensational speculation. It is a possibility rooted in the nature of empire, conquest, and spiritual stewardship. Wherever the Church went, stories followed. And wherever stories gathered, a few inevitably found their way into Rome. To begin unraveling this strand of the archive's mystique, one must travel back to antiquity, to a time when the Greek philosopher Plato described a powerful island civilization called Atlantis, one so advanced that its downfall became a parable of human hubris. Most historians treat the tale as allegory, yet its persistence in human imagination is striking, especially because flood myths and tales of sunken lands appear everywhere, from Sumerian tablets to Celtic folklore, from Polynesian chants to Andean cosmology. Even ancient Egyptian priests, in Plato's own writings, spoke of civilizations that rose and fell long before Greece existed. If such traditions were preserved in temple manuscripts, and if some of those manuscripts traveled through trade, conquest, or scholarly exchange, fragments might have reached early Christian collectors. Whether intentionally preserved or incidentally archived, they could still rest in the Vatican today, disguised among unrelated documents, their significance unrecognized or deliberately quieted. The possibility gains further weight when one considers the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. It depicts the coastlines of South America and Antarctica with perplexing precision, this centuries before Antarctica's icy boundaries were mapped by modern explorers. The admiral himself wrote that he based his map on ancient sources, fragments of older charts that had passed from empire to empire. Scholars have debated whether these sources were Greek, Phoenician, or something older still. But here lies the tantalizing question. If fragments of ancient maps existed in the Ottoman world in the early 1500s, could others have been carried west as spoils of war or diplomatic gifts? And if European scholars, missionaries, or diplomats encountered such materials, would they not have sent them to the one institution known for archiving everything unusual? Rome? This idea wedges itself into the mind because it suggests not only that ancient civilizations possessed seafaring capabilities, but that their knowledge survived long enough to influence later cartographers. If even one scroll describing the world before the rise of known civilizations found its way to the Vatican, it would be enough to alter historical understanding. But Atlantis is only one mythic echo. Far to the east, Victorian-era theosophists popularized the idea of Lemuria, a lost continent in the Indian Ocean. Modern science dismissed the theory when plate tectonics emerged, yet the legend resonates with far older traditions. Stories of primordial lands swallowed by rising seas, civilizations guided by star-watching priesthoods, and migrations triggered by environmental collapse. Some late 19th century writers claimed that ancient records of Lemuria were guarded by monastic orders, perhaps even by Jesuits who traveled across Asia. These claims are speculative at best. Yet they reveal how the Church's far-reaching networks made it a natural receptor for such traditions. Jesuit missionaries documented local histories with astonishing detail, gathering cosmologies, genealogies, and origin myths from communities they encountered. Their letters occasionally described knowledge so old that even local elders considered it ancestral rather than historical. If drawings, scrolls, or oral traditions hinting at forgotten civilizations were recorded, copied, and forwarded to Rome, they may now lie in the archives, filed not as myth, but as ethnographic testimony. More tangible than myth is the question of ancient catastrophe. Geological evidence now confirms that around 10,000 BCE, at the end of the last ice age, sea levels rose more than 400 feet, drowning continental shelves across the globe. Coastlines shifted dramatically. Entire low-lying regions vanished beneath the ocean in a matter of centuries or even decades. If civilizations or proto-civilizations existed along those coastlines, as logic suggests they might, then their destruction could have produced legends preserved in later cultures. Flood myths are nearly universal. The Epic of Gilgamesh from Mesopotamia, the story of Manu in India, the tales of Nuo in Polynesia, the Maya flood narratives, and countless others. For centuries, theologians sought to interpret these stories through a biblical lens. But missionaries encountering flood traditions across the world would have recognized parallels too numerous to dismiss. Some may have recorded local versions in painstaking detail. Those manuscripts, containing descriptions of cataclysmic events predating written history, could have made their way to Rome. A particularly haunting possibility is that the archives contain eyewitness accounts of catastrophes recorded by ancient scribes. Early historians like Berossus, a Babylonian priest writing in the 3rd century BCE, described dynasties stretching back tens of thousands of years and floods that reshaped the earth. His works survive only in fragments quoted by later authors. But if missionaries or travelers encountered copies of similar texts in the Middle East before modern geopolitical upheavals, they may have been sent to the Vatican. Likewise, Egyptian temple records once housed chronicles of kings predating the pharaohs known to mainstream history. While most of these records are believed lost, some scholars suspect that fragments survived in private collections before being acquired by European institutions. If even a sliver of such materials exists in the Vatican, it would fundamentally challenge the chronological framework that underpins modern archaeology. Then there are the rumors of a mysterious manuscript known as the Chronicle of the Sea Peoples, supposedly glimpsed by an Italian scholar in the early 20th century. According to the tale, the manuscript described great migrations that tore through the Bronze Age world, toppling empires and plunging regions into darkness. Archaeology now confirms that mysterious raiders, called the Sea Peoples, did indeed attack ancient Mediterranean civilizations around 1200 BCE, contributing to the collapse of the Mycenaean, Hittite, and other societies. But the scholar who claimed to have seen the manuscript insisted that it contained first-hand descriptions of these events, accounts written by scribes who witnessed the upheaval. If such a document truly exists, it would be one of the most valuable historical records ever preserved. Yet no scholar has ever seen it since. Was it misidentified? Was it a fraud? Or was it quietly absorbed into a collection already teeming with enigmatic treasures? The archives may also hold records of ancient cities rediscovered long before modern archaeology. In South America, explorers and missionaries encountered vast stone ruins overgrown by jungle, cities unknown to local tribes and undocumented in European chronicles. Some Jesuit letters mention structures with perfect stone joints, roads stretching for miles, terraces carved into mountainsides, and temples aligned with astronomical precision. These accounts, though occasionally sensationalized, reflect real architectural accomplishments later confirmed by archaeologists studying the Inca, Tiwanaku, and other civilizations. If early missionaries recorded their observations before colonial destruction altered the landscape, their letters could contain invaluable details about sites now eroded or lost. It is not impossible that such letters, containing pre-modern descriptions of ancient South American ruins, remain in the Vatican's collections. Similarly, in Africa, Portuguese explorers in the 16th century wrote of monumental stone complexes, such as Great Zimbabwe, a city whose origins were hotly contested by colonial-era scholars, unwilling to believe that sub-Saharan Africans built such marvels. Some of those early reports were forwarded to Rome. If they survive, they may capture details of the city before looting and decay altered its appearance. Manuscripts like these, though not sensational, enrich our understanding of human achievement in eras when mainstream narratives underestimated non-European civilizations. The archive's possible connection to pre-Columbian civilizations is equally compelling. When Spanish conquistadors encountered the Maya, Aztec, and Inca, they destroyed countless codices, sacred books containing histories, astronomical data, calendars, and philosophies. A few friars, however, attempted to preserve native knowledge. Some copied glyphs, others recorded oral traditions, and a few smuggled codices out of regions ravaged by conquest. Whether any of these found their way to Rome remains unclear, but rumors persist of a small number of indigenous manuscripts surviving under Vatican protection. If true, They might contain mathematical and astronomical systems far more precise than European scholars could appreciate in earlier centuries. The possibility that the Vatican possesses ancient maps showing coastlines as they appeared before post-Ice Age flooding is perhaps the most provocative theory. Such maps, if they existed, would imply a prehistoric civilization capable of global navigation. Critics dismiss this as fantasy. Yet anomalies like the Piri race map continue to trouble conventional historians. If fragments of ancient cartography once circulated through the Middle East and Mediterranean, captured by empires and traded between scholars, the Vatican, an institution uniquely adept at gathering and preserving documents, might be the final inheritor of such knowledge. The archive's rumored holdings extend even further into the uncharted, touching on manuscripts collected from indigenous communities describing celestial visitors, skyborne catastrophes, and star-aligned temples. While modern interpretations may be influenced by contemporary fascination with extraterrestrial theories, the manuscripts themselves, if they exist, would reflect humanity's ancient relationship with the sky. For millennia, civilizations observed the heavens with reverence, fear, and scientific curiosity. Astronomical alignments in temples across the world testify to sophisticated knowledge of celestial mechanics. Missionaries encountering such traditions may have documented them, blending observation with interpretation. Their notes could still be housed in the Vatican, silent evidence of ancient cultures whose relationship with the cosmos was both spiritual and scientific. What binds all these possibilities together is the Catholic Church's extraordinary historical reach. For centuries, it was the most interconnected institution on Earth, maintaining networks across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. Letters poured into Rome from missionaries describing kingdoms hidden in jungles, ruins buried in deserts, and legends preserved by remote tribes. Some missionaries were scholars, others were mere observers. But all captured fragments of human memory, stories, customs, maps, drawings, rumors. These fragments, taken collectively, represent a mosaic of global heritage. The Vatican, intentionally or not, became the recipient of this mosaic. If the archives truly contain records of lost civilizations, they are unlikely to be labeled dramatically. More likely, they sit quietly within boxes marked ethnographic correspondences, missionary reports, or miscellaneous antiquities. Their significance might not even be recognized by modern archivists, or perhaps it is recognized and withheld. Throughout history, powerful institutions have grappled with the dilemma of disclosure. Revealing certain truths too early risks destabilizing fragile societies. Holding them too long risks erasing them entirely. The Vatican's silence on the matter may reflect not conspiracy, but caution. Yet caution breeds mystery, and mystery breeds imagination. The archives have become a symbol not of secrecy, but of possibility. They represent the idea that humanity's past is incomplete, that civilizations may have risen and fallen before our recorded history began, leaving behind ruins, myths, and manuscripts scattered across continents. Whether the Vatican preserves these remnants or merely symbolizes our longing to recover them, the effect is the same. It forces us to question the finality of historical narratives. And perhaps that is the true power of the archives. Not that they hide knowledge, but that they remind us how much knowledge has already been lost. They invite us to consider that beneath the ocean, beneath the sands, beneath the ruins of forgotten cities, and beneath the silent shelves of Rome lie fragments of a human story still waiting to be understood. The archive's greatest secret may not be any single manuscript, but the vast unspoken truth that history is more fragile, more mysterious, and more cyclical than we dare to imagine. If rumors of lost civilizations ignite wonder, then the whispers surrounding forbidden rituals, suppressed doctrines, and esoteric practices preserved in the Vatican's deepest vaults stir something darker, an unease that the Church has, at times, acted not only as guardian of spiritual truth, but as custodian of dangerous knowledge. The notion is not born from conspiracy fantasies, but from the documented reality that the Church confronted a bewildering array of spiritual systems across continents and centuries. Wherever missionaries journeyed, they encountered rituals older than any cathedral, cosmologies shaped by mountains, rivers, and stars, and spiritual traditions that could not be assimilated into Christian doctrine without creating fractures. Some practices were condemned, others were tolerated quietly, and some, deemed too potent or too revealing to destroy, were instead recorded, archived, and sealed. The story begins in the early centuries of Christianity, long before the Vatican had marble floors or frescoed ceilings, when the faith was still defining itself against a backdrop of competing beliefs. Gnostic sects preached secret knowledge and mystical assent. Mystery religions promised salvation through initiation into cosmic dramas. Philosophical schools blended mathematics, astronomy, and spirituality. Early theologians engaged vigorously with these traditions, sometimes adopting their terminology while rejecting their doctrines. They debated dualism, emanations, cosmic hierarchies, and the nature of the soul in ways that now seem almost esoteric. Their writings, both supportive and critical, formed a sprawling intellectual landscape that later councils sought to simplify. When orthodoxy solidified, many writings fell into disfavor. Manuscripts that preserved mystical practices, visionary experiences, or symbolic interpretations of Scripture were quietly removed from circulation. Scholars speculate that copies survived in monastic libraries and that a portion eventually reached Rome. If so, they might still sit in the archives today, preserved not for their truth, but for their historical relevance. One of the most persistent whispers concerns ritual manuals, handwritten documents describing practices that early Christians encountered and condemned. These might include purification rites from Egyptian temples, incantations from Greco-Roman magical papyri, or ceremonial instructions from mystery cults that emphasized rebirth through symbolic death. The Church, though hostile to such practices, understood the importance of studying them. To fight a belief, one must understand its lure. Inquisitors and theologians took notes meticulously, documenting rituals they sought to eradicate. Over time, these notes accumulated, sometimes copied, sometimes edited, often locked away. A manual describing how a priest of Isis invoked cosmic light, or how devotees of Mithras reenacted celestial battles, may not have survived in its original form, but fragments might exist in inquisitorial reports or missionary correspondences housed in the Vatican. Another category of rumored texts involves pagan oracles, prophetic writings revered in antiquity but suppressed as Christianity gained dominance. The Sibylline books, destroyed, rewritten, lost, rediscovered, and ultimately suppressed, are the most famous example. Yet countless lesser-known oracular traditions existed across the Mediterranean and Near East. Some Greek and Roman authors recorded these prophecies. Some manuscripts circulated for centuries before disappearing. Scholars suspect that Christian theologians may have studied such oracles, particularly those predicting a divine savior or cosmic transformation. If so, copies or translations might still exist in the archives, sealed away to prevent confusion or syncretism. One rumor describes a manuscript containing oracles from a forgotten temple in Asia Minor, acquired by a traveling bishop in late antiquity and delivered to Rome. The manuscript allegedly compared cosmic ages, linking floods, fires, and celestial realignments. No scholar has ever verified the claim, but the persistence of the rumor reflects humanity's enduring fascination with prophecy. From Europe, the story shifts to the indigenous cultures of the Americas, where missionaries encountered spiritual traditions radically different from anything known in Europe. Aztec priests performed rituals honoring cosmic cycles. Maya astronomers calculated lunar and planetary movements with astonishing accuracy, and Inca scholars preserved oral traditions describing world ages and transformative floods. Missionaries condemned many of these rituals, yet they documented them carefully. Some friars learned native languages, recorded myths, and copied glyphs. Their notes, brought back to Rome, may contain descriptions of ceremonies, cosmologies, and spiritual practices that survived conquest only through missionary transcription. These documents could offer unparalleled insight into pre-Columbian worldviews, preserved not by the cultures themselves, whose libraries were often destroyed, but by the very institutions seeking to convert them. The archive's rumored holdings also extend into Africa, where missionaries encountered kingdoms with ancient spiritual systems, some incorporating ancestor veneration, astral symbolism, or ritual healing practices. Letters from early Jesuits describe ceremonies involving rhythmic chanting, trance states, and divination. While these accounts sometimes reflect the biases of European observers, they preserve fragments of traditions that modern scholars struggle to reconstruct. If these letters survive in the Vatican archives, they may represent some of the earliest ethnographic records of African spiritualities. Documents that capture voices once dismissed or misunderstood. Then there are the forbidden rites of Europe itself, practices that endured long after Christianity became the dominant faith. In remote valleys, mountains, and forests, folk rituals blended pre-Christian beliefs with Christian symbolism. Some involved herbal potions used for healing, others invoked local spirits or saints associated with specific landscapes. During the Middle Ages, the Church launched campaigns to eradicate such practices, yet inquisitors often recorded them meticulously, not only to prosecute, but to understand the beliefs they confronted. These reports, preserved for legal and theological purposes, form a trove of ethnographic detail. They reveal a Europe where Christianity and pagan traditions coexisted in uneasy tension. Some scholars argue that copies of these reports, complete with descriptions of nighttime rituals, seasonal ceremonies, and healing techniques, now lie in the Vatican archives, preserved not as sacred texts, but as historical evidence of spiritual diversity. Perhaps the darkest category of rumored manuscripts involves instructions or testimonies related to exorcism and possession. Exorcism, often associated with superstition, was treated with utmost seriousness by the Church. Priests trained in ritual formulas, prayers, and diagnostic methods. Their reports, documenting symptoms, dialogues, manifestations, and outcomes, were sometimes forwarded to higher authorities. A few may have been sent to Rome for review, especially cases deemed extraordinary. If such documents exist, they could provide a disturbing window into medieval and early modern worldviews, blending theology, psychology, and fear. Yet not all esoteric manuscripts relate to other cultures. Some rumors claim that the Vatican holds internal mystical writings, accounts of visions, revelations, or private teachings imparted to devout individuals. Throughout history, saints and mystics reported experiences that defied doctrinal boundaries. Teresa of Avila described spiritual ecstasy in terms so vivid that some theologians feared her words might encourage others toward uncontrolled mysticism. Hildegard of Bingen recorded visions of cosmic order, blending theology with proto-scientific imagery. While many of these writings are celebrated publicly, others may have been judged too obscure or too ambiguous for circulation. Manuscripts describing mystical cosmologies, symbolic interpretations of creation, or esoteric theological models might have been archived quietly. Their content deemed inspirational for some, but potentially confusing for the broader faithful. Somewhat more unsettling are the rumors of apocryphal Jesus traditions, not gospels exactly, but fragments of conversations, parables, or teachings preserved by early Christian mystics. If these writings exist, they might reflect theological experimentation rather than historical fact. Yet they would still offer insight into how early believers wrestled with questions of divinity, morality, and cosmic purpose. Some texts reportedly describe Jesus speaking in metaphors drawn from astronomy, agriculture, and ritual symbolism. Others present teachings that emphasize inner transformation over external observance. The Church, committed to preserving doctrinal unity, may have quietly archived such writings rather than promoting them publicly. Still darker whispers point to manuscripts related to ritual magic, a category that overlaps with alchemy, astrology, and ceremonial rites. Medieval grimoires, manuals describing spells, invocations, and symbolic diagrams, once circulated widely. Most were condemned by the Church, yet copies may have been preserved as part of inquisitorial collections. These texts describe rituals invoking angels, spirits, or cosmic forces. Their diagrams reflect complex symbolic systems blending Christian, Jewish, and pagan elements. While many grimoires are now available through libraries and academic collections, some scholars speculate that earlier, rarer, or more complete versions may survive only in the Vatican. The Church would not treat such texts as spiritually valid, but it might preserve them as evidence of past heresies or misguided attempts at spiritual mastery. The archive's rumored esoteric holdings grow even more intriguing when considering secret societies that emerged in medieval and early modern Europe. Groups like the Knights Templar, Rosicrucians, and certain Masonic lodges have been the subject of endless speculation. When the Templars were suppressed in the early 14th century, their properties were seized, their leaders interrogated, and their records confiscated. Some documents undoubtedly reached Rome. These might include financial records, military correspondences, or mundane inventories. Yet persistent rumors claim that the Templars possessed esoteric knowledge inherited from the Holy Land, knowledge that passed into the hands of the Church when the order was dissolved. Whether this is truth or legend, the possibility adds another layer to the archive's mythology. The Rosicrucians, a semi-mythical group described in anonymous 17th-century manifestos, were said to pursue hidden wisdom, blending alchemy, Christian mysticism, and Hermetic philosophy. Some historians believe the manifestos were literary inventions, yet others argue they reflect real intellectual networks. If church agents encountered writings attributed to such societies, they may have preserved them, not as dangerous truth, but as examples of spiritual experimentation. But perhaps the most controversial speculations concern rituals said to predate recorded history, preserved through oral tradition, and encountered by missionaries among remote tribes. Some speak of initiatory ceremonies involving star lore, symbolic rebirth, or trance-induced journeys into the spirit world. Others describe rituals commemorating cataclysmic events, fires from the sky, floods that consumed continents, migrations guided by celestial signs. Missionaries often interpreted these rites through a Christian lens, seeing echoes of biblical events or distortions of divine revelation. Their letters, preserved as ethnographic accounts, may contain descriptions of spiritual systems older than any surviving scripture. What makes these rumors so enduring is the Vatican's historical role as collector, classifier, and gatekeeper. For centuries, it served as a central node in a global network of information. Missionaries sent reports to Rome, bishops archived local traditions, inquisitors documented forbidden rites, scholars copied manuscripts from libraries in Greece, Egypt, and the Middle East. Over time, these documents accumulated into a vast mosaic of humanity's spiritual diversity. Much of this material is mundane, but some fragments may be profound, echoes of spiritual systems long vanished, hints of rituals forgotten by their practitioners, or records of cosmologies that interpreted the world in ways modern minds can barely fathom. These possibilities generate friction because they challenge familiar timelines. They suggest that humanity's spiritual imagination did not begin with the major world religions, but stretches back into prehistory. Rituals tied to celestial cycles may reflect ancient astronomical knowledge. Ceremonies invoking fire, water, or earth may encode memories of environmental catastrophes. Symbolic death and rebirth may reflect psychological insights lost to later generations. If manuscripts documenting such traditions exist in the Vatican, they could offer unparalleled insight into the evolution of human spirituality. And yet, the Vatican rarely addresses these rumors directly. Its silence is not necessarily sinister. It may simply reflect the weight of administrative complexity. The archives contain millions of documents, many uncatalogued, many untranslated. Some boxes may hold materials no one has examined in centuries. Scholars granted access often focus on political history, theology, or papal records, leaving ethnographic manuscripts untouched. The idea that esoteric documents remain hidden may stem less from active concealment and more from institutional inertia. Still, the effect is the same. The archives have become a symbol of the unknown, a vault where the strangest corners of human belief might still linger in quiet slumber. Whether they contain forbidden rituals, suppressed doctrines, or esoteric manuscripts is ultimately less important than the role they play in our collective imagination. They remind us that history is not simply a record of what happened, but a tapestry woven from what was preserved, what was silenced, and what was forgotten. The archives represent the boundaries of that tapestry, the edge where documented history meets the vast frontier of human mystery. If esoteric manuscripts rest within those shelves, they are not merely relics of forbidden knowledge. They are testimonies to humanity's insatiable desire to understand the world and its place within it. They reveal a spiritual landscape rich with diversity, experimentation, and symbolism. They remind us that every belief system, no matter how dominant, exists within a larger context of human searching. And they hint at a deeper truth, that the Vatican, intentionally or not, has become the unwitting guardian of humanity's forgotten spiritual inheritance. Perhaps the real secret of the archives is not what they hide, but what they represent. A silent acknowledgement that our spiritual history is wider, deeper, and more mysterious than any single tradition can contain. They stand as a monument to the vastness of human imagination, a vault of echoes preserved across millennia, a reminder that even the darkest rituals and most enigmatic doctrines are part of our shared journey through the unknown. If whispered tales of esoteric rites linger like shadows along the edges of faith, then the most unsettling strand of Vatican lore emerges from a different kind of silence, the rumor that the archives may conceal encounters with the inexplicable. These whispers do not concern theology, lost civilizations, or forbidden science alone. They touch on phenomena that unsettle the boundaries between heaven and earth, faith and fear, myth and experience. They suggest that throughout history, humanity has witnessed events that defy easy explanation, luminous apparitions, celestial anomalies, impossible artifacts, and encounters described in terms that blend the sacred with the strange. As missionaries and clergy documented these occurrences in regions far from Rome, many of their reports were forwarded to higher authorities. Some were dismissed, some were debated, and some, according to persistent rumor, were quietly filed away. Too ambiguous to declare miraculous, too unsettling to discard, and too disruptive to reveal publicly. The story begins centuries ago, when priests and explorers recorded celestial phenomena that seemed to rupture the ordinary flow of nature. Medieval chronicles describe fiery objects streaking across the sky, spheres of light hovering motionless above villages, and stars that moved against the heavens in ways no known astronomy could explain. These accounts, often written in earnest detail, are scattered across Europe's monastic archives. But some chroniclers, particularly those working under ecclesiastical authority, sent duplicate reports to Rome. A monk in France might describe a glowing orb drifting over farmland at dusk. A priest in Hungary might report that villagers witnessed a column of light descending into a forest. Whether these were atmospheric events, astronomical anomalies, or manifestations interpreted through the lens of medieval belief, they demanded scrutiny. The Church, cautious about declaring miracles, would have preserved these accounts for later evaluation. Over centuries, they may have accumulated into a quiet dossier of phenomena that hovered between natural explanation and supernatural implication. These events were not limited to Europe. As missionaries journeyed across continents, they encountered descriptions of sky phenomena rooted deeply in local cosmologies. In Japan, Shinto priests spoke of floating lights that moved purposefully through mountains. In the Americas, Maya astronomers documented unusual celestial alignments and luminous events recorded in codices and oral tradition. In Africa, elders described sky spirits descending during storms or droughts, leaving behind geometric impressions on the ground. While missionaries often interpreted these accounts through theological frameworks, they also recorded them with surprising detail, sometimes sketching diagrams or noting local interpretations. These letters, preserved as ethnographic observations, may still lie in the Vatican's archives, offering a rare cross-cultural glimpse into ancient perceptions of the extraordinary. The phenomenon grows stranger still when one considers persistent rumors of objects, oddities collected by explorers, missionaries, and scholars that defy easy classification. Some letters from the 17th century describe artifacts uncovered during excavations in the Middle East. Metallic spheres of unknown alloy, stone tablets etched with symbols predating known scripts, and glass-like materials fused in ways inconsistent with ancient technology. Missionaries, lacking scientific expertise, sometimes described these objects in mystical terms. A Jesuit in Syria reportedly sent a parcel containing a carved object not made by human hand, claiming it was found in a collapsed temple foundation. The artifact was never seen again. Another letter, forwarded from a French missionary in Ethiopia, described a metallic fragment said to have fallen from the sky during a storm. The fragment, when struck, produced tones unlike any metal known at the time. The missionary, convinced it was a divine sign, sent it to Rome. Whether these objects were meteorites, misidentified relics, or something stranger is unknown. What is known is that Rome routinely received such packages, curiosities from around the world, preserved not as holy relics, but as evidence of divine mystery. But the most haunting category of rumor concerns encounters, episodes in which individuals or communities claimed contact with beings or forces beyond ordinary comprehension. In medieval Europe, many such encounters were interpreted as angelic visitations. Some were catalogued as demonic manifestations. Others were left ambiguous. A 14th-century manuscript from central Italy describes shepherds who saw a shining figure descend onto a hillside, accompanied by a humming sound. The figure communicated no message, but remained visible for several minutes before rising skyward. Local clergy documented the event, sending a report to Rome. Scholars today might interpret such accounts as astronomical or meteorological anomalies, but the medieval mind grappled with them as spiritual visitations. If the Vatican preserved these reports, they may form a unique historical archive of pre-scientific encounters with the unexplained. As missionaries pushed into the Americas, Africa, and Asia, they encountered even more enigmatic traditions. Indigenous communities often spoke of star beings or sky visitors who came in distant ages, teaching agriculture, astronomy, or moral law. Missionaries, interpreting these accounts through Christian theology, often equated such figures with angels or demons. Yet they recorded the details meticulously, noting descriptions of glowing vessels, thunderous descents, or beings clad in shimmering garments. Some missionaries debated whether these accounts reflected mythological memory, visionary experiences, or literal encounters. Their letters, reports, and diaries were often sent to Rome for review. Over centuries, they may have accumulated into a mosaic of global traditions describing encounters with beings whose nature remains unresolved. There are even rumors, though difficult to substantiate, that the archives contain documents describing physical traces left behind after such encounters. One tale speaks of a 16th century missionary in South America who found geometric patterns burned into the ground after villagers reported a sun chariot descending into a nearby field. Another report from India describes unusual footprints found on a mountainside, so large and widely spaced that no human or animal could have produced them. These descriptions might reflect misinterpretations of natural phenomena, lightning strikes, erosion, or animal tracks distorted by terrain. But the fact that missionaries forwarded such accounts to Rome suggests that they were taken seriously enough to document. Whether the Vatican preserves these materials is unknown, but the rumors persist because they speak to a universal human experience, awe in the face of the unexplainable. More unsettling still are whispers of apparitions that were investigated but never declared miraculous, encounters that defied classification but raised concerns. While the Catholic Church thoroughly scrutinizes claims of apparitions, only a tiny fraction receive official recognition. The rest, hundreds, perhaps thousands, are documented, analyzed, and archived. Some involve visions accompanied by physical effects, scorch marks on surfaces, disturbances in water, or sudden changes in temperature. Others describe luminous figures seen by multiple witnesses simultaneously. The Church does not publicize these cases, not out of secrecy, but out of caution. Misinterpretation could lead the faithful astray. Yet the documentation remains: reports from priests, testimonials from villagers, sketches of unusual light phenomena. Scholars granted access to the archives seldom search for these materials, focusing instead on political or theological documents. Thus, the apparitions remain in the shadows, neither dismissed nor embraced, preserved only as mysteries encountered by generations past. Another provocative category involves strange illnesses or cures associated with unexplained phenomena. Medieval records occasionally describe individuals who fell into sudden trances after witnessing mysterious lights, speaking in languages they did not know, or exhibiting temporary but profound physical changes. In some cases, these episodes were interpreted as possession, in others, as divine inspiration. Priests documented these occurrences carefully, noting symptoms, circumstances, and environmental details. Some scholars believe that these records could provide insights into neurological or psychological conditions misunderstood in earlier centuries. Others suggest that they may preserve evidence of shared visionary experiences, moments when entire communities perceived something extraordinary. Whether viewed through a scientific or spiritual lens, these reports hint at the complexity of human perception and the enduring mystery of altered states. One of the most enduring rumors involves a category of documents known informally as celestial correspondences, letters written by clergy who believed they had received messages from non-human intelligences. These letters, supposedly forwarded to Rome for evaluation, describe dreams, visions, or auditory experiences interpreted as communication from angels or otherworldly beings. While such claims were common in medieval mysticism, some descriptions diverge from established theological language. They reference symbols not found in Scripture, geometric patterns resembling ancient star charts, or phrases in unknown languages. Whether these experiences were mystical, psychological, or something more enigmatic, their documentation would have been carefully evaluated and possibly archived. The Church, cautious about encouraging private revelation, may have preserved these documents while withholding judgment. Modern rumors reach even further, suggesting that the archives contain classified reports from the 19th and early 20th centuries describing sightings of unidentified aerial phenomena by priests, pilots, or explorers. During the age of exploration and early aviation, numerous accounts of strange lights, objects, or atmospheric anomalies were recorded. Some pilots spoke of luminous disks pacing their aircraft. Explorers described glowing structures hovering above mountain ranges. Missionaries reported sudden bursts of light illuminating remote valleys. While many of these accounts may reflect natural phenomena, ball lightning, meteor showers, auroras, others defy simple categorization. If such reports were sent to Rome, they might lie within the modern sections of the archives, preserved as curiosities rather than investigated systematically. Rumors also hint at artifacts recovered from the Middle East, objects discovered during excavations in regions associated with biblical events. Some of these artifacts reportedly exhibit unusual properties or unexplained craftsmanship. Missionaries and scholars, lacking modern analytical tools, described them in terms that blend reverence with confusion. The Church, recognizing that sensational claims could distort faith, may have sealed these objects away to prevent misinterpretation. While this is speculative, history offers precedent. The Church has long been cautious about relics, subjecting them to rigorous scrutiny. Any artifact whose origin could not be authenticated or whose significance could not be clearly explained might have been quietly archived rather than displayed. Yet the most difficult category of rumor, and the one that fuels the most speculation, is the idea that the Vatican holds records of encounters that challenged the theological framework itself. These documents, if they exist, would not merely describe strange lights or unusual artifacts. They would record moments when clergy confronted something that did not fit neatly into categories of angelic visitation, demonic manifestation, or natural phenomenon. A 17th-century bishop in Spain reportedly described a luminous figure that appeared to him while he traveled at night, speaking in a voice he could not identify as human or divine. He documented the encounter in detail, sent the report to Rome, and requested guidance. No reply was recorded. The document's whereabouts are unknown. Another tale describes a Vatican investigator sent to evaluate a series of unexplained lights in rural France during the 18th century. His report, according to rumor, concluded that the phenomena were neither miraculous nor malevolent, but beyond natural philosophy. The phrase has lingered in the margins of speculation for generations. Skeptics argue that these rumors exaggerate isolated anecdotes. They remind us that the Vatican is an archive of human experience, not an encyclopedia of the supernatural. But believers in the unexplained counter that the Church's global reach and historical longevity make it uniquely positioned to collect such encounters. When humanity encountered the mysterious, the Church was often there, observing, documenting, judging, preserving. Its archives, intentionally or not, have become a vault of the unknown. Whether any of these documents truly exist matters less than what their rumors reveal about the human psyche. Throughout history, people have sought to understand their place in a vast, mysterious cosmos. They have gazed at the sky with awe and fear. They have experienced visions that defied explanation. They have encountered phenomena that left them shaken and searching for meaning. The Vatican Archives, as a symbol of concealed knowledge, serve as a mirror to that longing. They embody the idea that somewhere behind locked doors lie answers to questions we barely dare to voice. And perhaps that is the deeper truth. The archives need not contain extraterrestrial artifacts or secret encounter reports to fulfill their role in public imagination. The mystery itself is enough. The possibility that humanity has, at moments, brushed against the unexplainable, and that those moments were preserved by an institution tasked with interpreting the divine, invites us to confront the limits of our understanding. It urges us to consider that the universe may be stranger than our doctrines allow, more wondrous than our science predicts, and more complex than our histories suggest. The Vatican's silence on these matters does not confirm or deny the rumors. It preserves their power. In that silence, the human mind wanders, to shepherds seeing lights in the skies of medieval Italy, to missionaries recording legends of star beings in forgotten jungles, to explorers sending enigmatic artifacts to Rome, to bishops shaken by visions they could not categorize. Whether these stories reflect psychological, natural, or metaphysical phenomena is a question that may never be answered. But the fact that such stories persist across cultures, centuries, and continents suggests that humanity's dance with the unknown is an ancient, enduring truth. If the archives truly contain documentation of encounters with the inexplicable, they do not simply hide secrets. They preserve a record of humanity's confrontation with mystery itself. A record that, if ever revealed, might remind us how close we have always been to the edge of the extraordinary. If rumors of inexplicable encounters push the imagination towards the edge of the known world, then whispers of what the Vatican might conceal concerning suppressed histories of power, real geopolitical power. Pull that imagination sharply back to earth. For centuries, empires rose and fell on information, not merely armies. Kings lived or died based on letters, alliances, and betrayals recorded in ink rather than blood. Revolutions ignited from ideas exchanged in secret. And behind these tides of human ambition stood institutions capable of gathering, interpreting, and safeguarding extraordinary quantities of documentation. The Vatican, with its global networks of diplomats, missionaries, scholars, and informants, became one such institution. Its archives, therefore, may contain not only theological or esoteric secrets, but political truths too volatile to release. Truths that could unravel national myths, expose forgotten conspiracies, or reveal how fragile the notion of official history really is. To understand this possibility, one must first appreciate the Church's unparalleled reach during the medieval and early modern eras. Long before the advent of global communication, Catholic ecclesiastical networks created a vast information web stretching across continents. Bishops corresponded with Rome. Monarchs sought papal approval or mediation. Missionaries filed reports from every corner of the world. Diplomats traveled under papal protection. In Lisbon, Venice, Vienna, Krakow, Mexico City, Goa, Nagasaki, wherever Catholic feet touched ground, information flowed back to the Vatican. Even secular rulers recognized that the Church possessed intelligence channels rivaled only by empires. As a result, the archives became a silent repository of political memory. Alliances negotiated in secrecy, disputes mediated behind closed doors, threats whispered across oceans. Many of these documents eventually became public, but some remain locked away, fueling speculation that they contain revelations too disruptive to release. One such rumor concerns letters exchanged between popes and monarchs during periods of intense political crisis. Take, for instance, the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Chronicles focus on military defeat, but diplomatic correspondence paints a far more complex picture. Appeals for aid, last-minute negotiations, and warnings ignored. Some scholars believe that Rome possesses letters revealing how close, or how hopeless, the Christian world truly was to preventing the city's fall. Similar whispers surround the Crusades, with claims that the archives preserve first-hand accounts of alliances forged, broken, or betrayed. These letters may illuminate motives and machinations not captured in official histories, details that could alter how entire centuries of conflict are understood. Another long-standing rumor involves secret treaties, agreements forged in desperation or ambition, but concealed because their implications threatened public order. During the Age of Exploration, European powers carved up the world with papal approval. The Treaty of Tordesillas, dividing the New World between Spain and Portugal, is well known. But some historians speculate that earlier drafts, disagreements, or competing claims, now hidden, could reveal that the arrangement was more contested than the final document suggests. If Rome holds letters from indigenous rulers, explorers, or missionaries challenging imperial narratives, those documents could dramatically reshape our understanding of colonization. Even more provocative are rumors that the archives contain confessions or testimonies from political prisoners interrogated under ecclesiastical authority. During the Inquisition, individuals accused of heresy often spoke not only of theological dissent, but of political grievances. Their testimonies may reveal resistance movements, conspiracies, or underground networks long erased from history. Some may describe planned uprisings that never materialized or alternative governance systems suppressed before they could flourish. If preserved, such testimonies would offer extraordinary insight into how political and religious power intertwined, and how the Church navigated the dangerous terrain between spiritual stewardship and political control. Then there is the matter of assassinations and succession crises, moments when the Church acted as mediator, witness, or silent observer. Popes corresponded with monarchs embroiled in civil war, advised rulers facing rebellions, and received letters from nobles seeking support for coups. Some of these correspondences became public, others vanished into the archives. The rumors suggest that Rome possesses accounts of plots that could have altered national histories, assassinations attempted or prevented, deals struck in secrecy, and betrayals never revealed. A 17th-century French scholar once claimed that he glimpsed a dossier describing competing claims to a European throne, accompanied by letters proving that key battles were decided long before armies marched. Whether such documents truly exist is impossible to know, but the rumor persists because it aligns with the Church's historical position as moral arbiter and political confidant. Even more tantalizing are whispers of lost correspondences involving influential thinkers, manuscripts exchanged between theologians, philosophers, and scientists whose ideas threatened established worldviews. Letters from figures like Galileo, Descartes, or Erasmus may exist in fuller form within the Vatican than in public collections. Some scholars believe early drafts of Galileo's works, annotated by his supporters or critics, could lie in boxes unopened for centuries. Others speculate that the archives may contain private letters from Enlightenment thinkers whose public critiques of the Church masked private dialogues seeking common understanding. These documents, if they exist, could reveal unexpected alliances or philosophical nuances that reshape our understanding of ideological conflict. Beyond Europe, the Vatican received an enormous volume of missionary reports documenting political landscapes from Asia, Africa, and the Americas. Jesuits embedded in foreign courts often held positions of surprising influence, serving as advisors, scholars, or intermediaries. Their letters provide first-hand descriptions of dynastic struggles, diplomatic tensions, and international relations unknown to European chroniclers. If preserved, these reports could illuminate how global politics functioned outside the Western lens, how Chinese emperors perceived European powers, how African kingdoms managed alliances, how indigenous leaders approached negotiations with colonizers. The Church, cautious about destabilizing secular governance, may have archived these reports to prevent political misuse or misinterpretation. The rumors grow more volatile when one considers suppressed revolutions, movements that threatened to upend existing hierarchies but vanished from historical record. Some scholars believe the Vatican holds documents describing peasant uprisings in medieval Europe, suppressed before chroniclers took notice. Others suggest that the archives contain letters revealing indigenous rebellions in the Americas, coordinated resistance movements in Africa, or diplomatic alliances between Asian powers and local tribes. These documents may have been archived because they involved clergy, threatened missionaries, or raised theological questions. Yet they now represent historical windows into struggles erased by colonial narratives. Still more unsettling is the possibility that the Vatican holds maps contradicting accepted chronology. Rumors insist that the archives house charts drawn by explorers who reached parts of the world long before official discovery dates. One such rumor involves a map depicting the western coast of Africa with astonishing accuracy centuries before European navigation advanced sufficiently to survey it. Another whispers of a diagram showing the Pacific Islands in a configuration predating known Polynesian exploration. Scholars generally dismiss these tales as exaggerations, yet anomalies like the Piri Reis map keep such speculation alive. If the Vatican holds maps demonstrating earlier contact between civilizations, the implications would be profound, challenging narratives of isolation, superiority, and technological progress. Perhaps the most politically explosive category of rumor concerns records of contact between European powers and civilizations now forgotten. Explorers occasionally described cities or societies that have since vanished, swallowed by jungle, desert, or time. Missionaries wrote of encountering tribes with advanced metallurgy, unusual architectural traditions, or rituals suggesting contact with distant cultures. If such accounts exist, they could provide evidence of pre-modern globalization far more complex than historians acknowledge. They could reveal trade networks spanning oceans, migrations linking continents, or cultural exchanges unrecorded in mainstream texts. The archives may also contain economic secrets, documents describing trade routes, mining operations, banking scandals, or financial alliances concealed from public record. Medieval and Renaissance popes managed vast financial networks, receiving information from merchants, bankers, and diplomats. Letters describing economic crises, famine predictions, or currency manipulations could shed light on how wealth shaped political power. Some scholars speculate that the Church preserved detailed accounts of colonial exploitation. Records too disturbing to release, yet essential for understanding the darker aspects of global expansion. Another layer of rumor touches on suppressed technologies, not in the sense of futuristic inventions, but practical tools, agricultural techniques, or architectural methods that threatened entrenched interests. A letter from a Spanish missionary in Peru allegedly described a stone-cutting method used by local builders that could shape granite as if it were soft clay. If such techniques existed, they might challenge assumptions about ancient engineering. The Church, cautious about promoting indigenous superiority in eras of colonial rule, may have archived the report instead of circulating it. Still more provocative is the idea that the archives contain records of diplomatic failures whose exposure could embarrass nations. Treaties broken in secret, negotiations sabotaged by political rivals, alliances undermined by betrayal, all might exist in letters sent to Rome. Monarchs often used the papacy as mediator when secular channels failed. If Rome preserved the full diplomatic record, it would possess a parallel history of Europe, one not shaped by victory or defeat, but by negotiation and manipulation. The archive's political dimension extends even into the modern era, with rumors of classified reports from the world wars, descriptions of atrocities witnessed by clergy, documentation of resistance movements, or letters from leaders seeking moral guidance. During both world wars, priests served as chaplains, observers, and intermediaries. They wrote of battlefield horrors, diplomatic tensions, and humanitarian crises. Some of these reports became public, others vanished. Whether by design or neglect, the archives may hold materials that challenge sanitized versions of 20th century history. But perhaps the most haunting category of political rumor is the idea that the Vatican contains records of civilizations whose defeat was engineered, not accidental, societies whose destruction served geopolitical interests, later rewritten as moral necessity or historical inevitability. If missionaries documented forced conversions, cultural erasure, or political exploitation in detail, those records could fundamentally alter narratives of colonization. They could reveal how empires manipulated faith to secure power, or how local leaders resisted in ways erased by later chroniclers. For the Church, grappling with these truths would require confronting its own role, complex, sometimes noble, sometimes complicit, in global history. Why would the Vatican preserve such documents rather than destroy them? The answer lies in the Church's long-standing belief that knowledge, even dangerous knowledge, should be preserved for posterity. Institutions with long memories understand that destruction invites ignorance, but preservation, even if sealed, allows future generations to interpret and reconcile. The archives thus serve as both witness and conscience, keeper of truths too volatile for their own time, but too important to abandon forever. Yet secrecy breeds speculation. The mere possibility that the archives contain explosive political or historical revelations fuels the imagination precisely because the Church rarely confirms or denies such rumors. Silence creates a void, and the human mind fills that void with questions. What if Rome holds documents proving that ancient civilizations made contact long before Columbus? What if suppressed letters reveal that revolutions were not spontaneous, but engineered by unseen hands? What if forgotten confessions expose hidden conspiracies that reshaped the world? Ultimately, the Vatican archives represent not only spiritual authority, but historical power, the ability to shape narratives by deciding what is remembered and what is withheld. They stand at the intersection of memory and silence, truth and myth, revelation and restraint. And it is at that intersection that humanity's deepest suspicions arise. Not that the Church hides secrets maliciously, but that it guards truths too complex, too disruptive, or too misunderstood to release. Perhaps the greatest secret of the archives is not a document or a map or a confession, but the recognition that history is always larger than its official record. Behind every public chronicle lies a hidden ledger of erased victories, forgotten sorrows, suppressed ideas, and silent witnesses. The Vatican, by virtue of its global reach and ancient continuity, has become the keeper of that ledger. And so the rumors persist, whispers of letters that could unravel empires, maps that could redraw civilizations, testimonies that could redefine identity. Whether true or not, these whispers force us to confront the fragility of historical narrative and the immense power held by those who guard memory. The archives, in their silence, remind us that the world we know is built not only on what survived, but on what was preserved, hidden, or forgotten. If the Vatican archives hold political truths capable of reshaping nations, then the whispers that they may also conceal the darkest chapters of human history. Eras when knowledge, power, and catastrophe converged, push the mythology of those vaults into its most profound and unsettling territory. These are not rumors of lost civilizations or suppressed doctrines alone. They are rumors that the archives may contain records of moments when humanity stood on the precipice of collapse. Moments so devastating, so revealing, or so morally ambiguous that preserving them required silence. In this telling, the archives become something more than a library. They become a sanctuary for memory too volatile for public reckoning. Genocides erased from chronicle, technologies that spiraled beyond control, pandemics born of human folly, disasters exacerbated by political ambition, and moral failures so immense that history quietly turned its gaze away. To understand the roots of this idea, one must examine how the Church, throughout history, found itself positioned at the crossroads of nearly every crisis humankind endured. Priests served as witnesses to famine and plague. Missionaries stood at the front lines of imperial expansion and collapse. Bishops advised kings as wars consumed continents. Scholars worked within monastic libraries while the world outside burned. The Vatican's informants were not spies in the modern sense, but observers of civilization, chronicling humanity's triumphs and tragedies with unnerving proximity. Many of their reports entered the archives intentionally, others arrived by accident. But taken together, they form a silent ledger of human fragility, a ledger that, according to rumor, contains truths too heavy for public history to bear. One of the most persistent whispers concerns pandemics, not the ones we know from textbooks, but outbreaks long forgotten or deliberately erased. Medieval Europe endured waves of disease that reshaped society, yet chroniclers often described symptoms so inconsistent that modern scholars struggle to classify them. Priests documented fevers that killed within hours, rashes that glowed faintly in candlelight, or illnesses that afflicted only isolated villages before vanishing. Missionaries in the Americas and Asia recorded epidemics that devastated entire tribes within weeks. Some diseases appeared to follow trade routes. Others emerged from remote regions without warning. Jesuit letters describing such outbreaks may have included early epidemiological observations, patterns, causes, or social consequences that frightened contemporaries. If these letters reached Rome, they would represent a shadow medical history of the world, a record of illnesses that left no name, no cure, and no survivors to speak of them. Whispers grow darker still when they touch on plagues connected to political or military experimentation. During the Renaissance, numerous city-states experimented with rudimentary biological warfare, contaminated clothing, diseased corpses, poisoned wells. These acts were rarely recorded in official histories, but priests tending to victims may have documented patterns suggesting intentional spread. Missionaries encountering indigenous warfare sometimes described tactics involving toxins or ritualized infection. Such accounts, deemed too disturbing or politically dangerous, may have been forwarded to the Vatican for analysis and containment. Whether they were preserved remains unknown, but the idea persists that deep within the archives lie documents outlining humanity's earliest flirtations with catastrophic scientific arrogance. Another area of whispered darkness involves genocides that never made it into public chronicle. History, written by victors or survivors, often omits the full scale of annihilation. Priests traveling with colonial expeditions may have witnessed massacres concealed from European courts. Missionaries in Africa or Asia may have recorded the destruction of tribes, villages, or kingdoms erased before chroniclers ever arrived. One rumor tells of a missionary in the Amazon who documented the systematic eradication of a tribe believed to possess knowledge of herbal medicines capable of rivaling European pharmacology. His letters allegedly described not just violence, but the erasure of culture, a destruction so thorough that no trace remained except his testimony. When he sent his writings to Rome, the story goes, they vanished into the archives. Whether this story is true matters less than the implication. That Rome, as the repository of global ecclesiastical memory, may hold the only surviving accounts of civilizations erased by conquest, greed, or fear. More unsettling still are whispers of mass disappearances, entire communities that vanished without explanation. Medieval chronicles occasionally describe villages found empty, with food still simmering on hearths. Missionaries in remote regions reported finding settlements abandoned in haste, belongings scattered as if residents fled an unseen terror. Some letters describe eerie stillness, others the presence of strange markings on trees or stones. While modern scholars attribute these events to famine, disease, or migration, some contemporaries believed something far stranger occurred. Reports of sudden abandonment were often dismissed by secular authorities, but priests took them seriously, documenting details that might have been ignored by others. If these reports accumulated in the Vatican, they would form a haunting map of human disappearances across centuries, a record of mysteries that defy simple explanation. Dark rumors also swirl around the archive's potential documentation of technological disasters in ancient or medieval times. Stories persist of inventors whose devices backfired catastrophically, early explosives that leveled villages, chemical experiments that unleashed toxic fumes, mechanical failures that caused destruction on a scale too embarrassing to record publicly. One tale describes a medieval monk who attempted to harness steam power and inadvertently destroyed half a monastery. Another recounts an alchemist whose experiments released a poisonous vapor that killed dozens. These accounts, if real, would have been suppressed to protect institutional reputation and prevent panic. But priests investigating the aftermath may have sent meticulous descriptions to Rome. If such reports exist, they represent humanity's earliest lessons in the dangers of innovation, lessons forgotten as progress marched forward. Rumors grow more intricate when they touch on forbidden environmental knowledge. Documents describing ecological collapses or climate disasters that occurred long before modern science understood such phenomena. Priests and monks served as some of the earliest climatologists, recording weather patterns, crop failures, and natural disasters. Some letters describe winters so severe that entire forests died, summers so hot that rivers evaporated, and storms so violent that villages were swept away. These events, when pieced together, may represent early evidence of regional climate cycles, volcanic eruptions, or atmospheric disruptions. One missionary in Iceland allegedly documented a sky-dimming event centuries before the famous Laki eruption. Another in Indonesia described a volcanic explosion that darkened the sky across islands. The Church, aware of the spiritual and political implications of apocalyptic imagery, may have chosen to archive these accounts discreetly. If they exist, they could offer a continuous climate record stretching back centuries, data both scientifically invaluable and politically sensitive. But the darkest and most persistent rumor concerns catastrophes caused not by nature or disease, but by human ambition, failed experiments in power, energy, or weaponry. Some stories claim that Renaissance or medieval inventors stumbled upon principles of physics or chemistry far ahead of their time, only to unleash unintended destruction. One legend speaks of a device capable of producing immense heat, tested secretly in a European workshop and abandoned after it caused a catastrophic fire. Another describes a manuscript outlining a primitive form of electricity used experimentally to charge metal rods, resulting in an explosion witnessed by clergy. Whether these tales reflect truth or imagination, they imply a chilling possibility: that humanity's march toward technological mastery has always been shadowed by the threat of catastrophe, and that the Vatican may have preserved early warnings now long forgotten. The archive's relationship to darkness does not end with physical disaster. It extends to moral and psychological catastrophes, moments when individuals or societies confronted depths of cruelty or despair too painful to articulate publicly. Priests serving in wartime witnessed atrocities that defy comprehension. Missionaries confronting slavery, ritual violence, or human sacrifice documented horrors often sanitized by later historians. Their letters, written with trembling hands, may have been preserved not for public awareness, but for internal reckoning. They represent snapshots of human beings pushed to their ethical limits, moments that challenge the very foundations of morality. If these documents lie in the Vatican archives, they testify to the darkest corners of human behavior, corners that institutions and nations prefer to forget. Then come the whispers, rare but persistent, of records describing psychological phenomena regarded as supernatural, demonic, or prophetic. Priests documented states of madness accompanied by startling lucidity, individuals who predicted disasters with uncanny accuracy, or communities driven to hysterical frenzy by unknown forces. Some of these episodes likely reflect psychological conditions not understood at the time. Others may reflect mass trauma triggered by environmental or social stress, but a few, according to rumor, defied classification so thoroughly that investigators forwarded their reports to Rome, seeking interpretation. These documents, blending fear with fascination, would offer insight into the liminal space between psychology and spirituality, a space the Church historically navigated with caution. Perhaps the most controversial category involves documents concerning humanity's moral failures, episodes when the Church itself confronted internal corruption, scandal, or ethical collapse. Throughout history, ecclesiastical authorities have investigated abuses, conspiracies, or moral crises within their ranks. These investigations produced reports, testimonies, and judgments sealed to protect individuals or prevent public scandal. While the Church has publicly acknowledged some failures, others remain obscured. Rumors insist that the archives contain dossiers revealing the full extent of corruption in certain eras, abuses of power, financial misconduct, or moral transgressions that would undermine public trust if revealed. Whether these dossiers are exaggerated or real, they underscore the burden carried by any institution tasked with policing itself. Even more explosive is the idea that the archives contain records of theological crises, moments when core doctrines were threatened not by external enemies, but by internal discoveries or revelations. Some scholars speculate that Vatican theologians encountered manuscripts or artifacts that challenged established timelines, altered interpretations of Scripture, or complicated the lineage of early Church authority. Rather than destroying these materials, the Church may have archived them for future review. Such documents, if they exist, would represent crossroads in theological development, forks in the road never revealed to the public. As the imagination wanders deeper into the vaults, one final rumor emerges: that the Vatican archives may contain warnings, documents describing past civilizations undone by pride, technological excess, or moral decay. Missionaries encountering ruins in Asia or the Americas sometimes recorded local traditions describing how those cities fell. Some tales speak of leaders blinded by ambition. Others describe societies that collapsed after exploiting natural resources or embracing destructive practices. These stories, though mythologized, may contain kernels of truth about how civilizations falter. If preserved, they could serve as a mirror through which modern humanity confronts its own vulnerabilities. Why would the Vatican preserve such darkness rather than hide or destroy it? The answer may lie in the Church's understanding of memory. Destruction erases context. Preservation, even in silence, creates a reservoir of wisdom for future generations. Some knowledge, too dangerous or painful for its own time, may become essential later. The archives thus operate not as a chamber of secrets, but as a long-term repository for lessons humanity could not immediately face. Yet secrecy comes at a cost. The absence of transparency nurtures suspicion, and suspicion fills the void with fear. The darkest rumors surrounding the archives persist, not because they are proven, but because they reflect an uncomfortable truth. Human history is filled with shadows, and someone, somewhere, has always been watching, recording, preserving. Whether the Vatican archives contain suppressed pandemics, forgotten genocides, disastrous inventions, or unthinkable atrocities, they symbolize a deeper reality: that the official story of the world, no matter how carefully curated, sits atop an ocean of untold sorrow, ambiguity, and mystery. Perhaps the archives do not hide monsters. Perhaps they hide mirrors, reflecting truths humanity is not ready to confront. Or perhaps they hide something else entirely: the acknowledgement that the past is not simply a pathway leading to the present, but a labyrinth where light and darkness intertwine, where memory and silence shape the world in equal measure. If that is true, then the Vatican's greatest secret is not what lies in its vaults, but why those vaults exist at all: to preserve the fragile truth that humanity, for all its brilliance and brutality, has always walked a razor's edge between creation and destruction. And the deeper we descend into the archive's imagined darkness, the more we confront the haunting possibility that the secrets they guard are not relics of a distant past, but warnings for a future we have not yet learned how to navigate. If the shadows of the Vatican's archives hint at forgotten catastrophes, suppressed histories, and encounters with the extraordinary, then the final whisper, the one that binds all others together, concerns something even more profound: the possibility that among those endless shelves lies a roadmap of humanity's future, assembled not through prophecy, but through patterns painstakingly preserved across centuries. This rumor suggests that the Vatican does not merely guard the past, it studies it, decodes it, and recognizes within it the rhythms of cycles repeating across civilizations. According to this idea, the archives contain documents that, taken together, reveal a truth too unsettling for public release: that human history moves in waves, rising and collapsing with eerie consistency, and that our era stands closer to the next turning point than we care to admit. To understand the weight of this possibility, one must first consider the archives not as a static vault, but as a living organism, fed by countless streams of global observation over millennia: letters from missionaries describing political unrest, scientific anomalies, or spiritual awakenings; reports from bishops detailing social upheaval or moral crises; chronicles from monks recording celestial events, weather patterns, and economic collapse. Each document, by itself, is a fragment, but taken as a whole, the collection becomes something else entirely: a tapestry of cause and effect, a record of how civilizations respond to pressure, temptation, discovery, fear, and hope. For generations, scholars within the Church may have analyzed these materials not only for historical accuracy, but for patterns, signatures of decline, markers of renewal, convergences of crisis. The first category of pattern arises from civilizational collapse. Across continents and eras, societies have crumbled under strikingly similar conditions. Priests in the Roman Empire described economic strain, political corruption, moral confusion, and shifting spiritual identities. Missionaries among the Maya recorded eerie parallels: abandoned cities, fractured leadership, a loss of cosmic orientation. Letters from travelers in the Middle East documented the decline of mighty empires whose borders dissolved almost overnight. If these accounts were preserved, and there is every reason to believe they were, they provide a rare multi-lens perspective on collapse. Some scholars speculate that Vatican archivists noticed similarities too consistent to ignore. Societies begin to fracture when they forget their origin stories, when they lose cohesion, when spiritual frameworks fail to evolve alongside material progress. These observations, if systematized, could amount to an unofficial theory of historical cycles, one the Church may have quietly used to interpret both the rise and fall of nations. The second category involves cosmic cycles. Monastic chronicles are filled with descriptions of comets, eclipses, meteor showers, auroras, and unusual celestial alignments. Not all chroniclers understood the science, but they recorded the sightings with precision: dates, durations, colors, shapes. Some manuscripts compare celestial events with political or spiritual crises occurring simultaneously. Modern astronomy confirms that comets, solar cycles, and geomagnetic disturbances can influence climate and, by extension, agriculture, population stability, and social order. If church scholars, some of whom were astronomers in their own right, began to see correlations between celestial cycles and earthly upheaval, they would have preserved those insights. One rumor suggests that certain monastic orders were tasked with long-term astronomical observation, their records forwarded to Rome for analysis. These logs, spanning centuries, may reveal periodicities that suggest the Earth is entering a new cycle of celestial turbulence. Then there are the geological patterns preserved through missionary correspondence and monastic chronicles. Reports of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, floods, droughts, and strange environmental shifts appear across every era. While ancient peoples interpreted these events spiritually, their descriptions remain valuable to modern understanding. If archivists layered these records together, they might have uncovered recurring global disturbances, a rhythm of environmental reset that echoes through time. Some myths preserved by missionaries describe cycles of destruction and renewal, aligning eerily with geological timelines now understood through science. One persistent rumor claims that the Vatican archives contain indigenous American accounts describing fires in the sky, earth-shaking storms, and floods sweeping entire landscapes, stories that may correspond to ancient impact events or massive volcanic eruptions. Taken together, these documents could form an unofficial chronicle of Earth's recurring catastrophes. But the most controversial pattern concerns spiritual cycles, periods when humanity collectively shifts its orientation toward meaning, morality, and identity. Priests documenting the European Enlightenment noted a sudden rise in skepticism, innovation, and individualism. Missionaries in Asia observed similar shifts centuries earlier during eras of philosophical revolution. Chroniclers in Africa and the Americas described moments when entire cultures re-evaluated their relationship to the cosmos. These transformations, though separated by geography, appear to follow an invisible pulse. Periods of rapid spiritual expansion followed by intervals of contraction, dogmatism, or fear. If Vatican scholars charted these cycles, they might have recognized that humanity periodically reinvents its understanding of existence, often preceded by crisis. In this framework, the Vatican archives become something more than a historical repository. They become a mirror in which the future can be faintly discerned, not through prophecy, but through pattern recognition. And according to the whispers, some within the Church believe that modern civilization is approaching a convergence of pressures not seen in centuries. Political polarization reminiscent of pre-collapse Rome. Rapid technological advancement echoing the destabilizing inventions of the Renaissance. Environmental strain mirroring the conditions preceding historical migrations. a global spiritual disorientation paralleling eras before major religious reformations. Whether one interprets these as coincidences or warnings depends on one's worldview, but the rumors suggest the Vatican has seen them before. One of the most persistent claims is that the archives contain letters from past eras describing moments that sound eerily like contemporary experience. A monk in the 14th century wrote of a world shrinking in communication yet growing in division, a phrase that resonates uncannily with the effects of modern technology. A missionary in China recorded the moral confusion of a society overwhelmed by sudden prosperity and philosophical fragmentation. A bishop in medieval France described political factions so polarized that compromise became unthinkable. Each document, by itself, is merely historical testimony. But if archivists compiled these parallels, they form a pattern. Civilizations often enter crisis when knowledge expands faster than wisdom. Then comes the most unsettling whisper, that the archives may contain warnings written by those who saw collapse firsthand, messages addressed not to their contemporaries, but to future generations. Some legends speak of manuscripts from scholars in lost civilizations, Egyptian priests, Middle Eastern astronomers, Mesoamerican philosophers, whose insights were preserved by accident or providence. These manuscripts reportedly describe world ages ending in cycles of renewal or destruction. Whether metaphorical or literal, their implications are profound. If the Vatican holds such texts, they may offer rare insight into how ancient peoples understood the fragility of their world. The rumors grow more dramatic when touching on statistical analyses performed in the modern era. Some say that during the 19th and early 20th centuries, church scholars used early mathematical methods to analyze patterns across archived materials, producing models predicting social upheaval, ideological conflict, or global transformation. While this rumor may exaggerate the Church's scientific involvement, it reflects a deeper truth. Any institution possessing 2 millennia of global observation would inevitably notice recurring themes. But perhaps the most provocative idea is that the Vatican archives contain records not of prophecy, but of preparation, documents outlining how past societies attempted to navigate crisis, preserve knowledge, or rebuild after collapse. Missionaries observed how indigenous elders safeguarded their traditions through story, symbol, and ritual. Monastic orders preserved knowledge during Europe's darkest centuries through disciplined scholarship. Civilizations facing destruction often created repositories of wisdom, codices, stelae, sculptures, carvings, designed to outlast the fall of their world. These examples, preserved in Vatican archives, could serve as blueprints for survival should modern civilization face a similar turning point. In this telling, the archives transform from a vault of secrets into a manual for continuity, a record of how humanity has endured in the face of danger. They contain not just darkness and warning, but resilience and guidance. They reveal that societies survive by adapting, preserving memory, and maintaining a thread of meaning through chaos. If such documents exist, they may not predict the future, but they illuminate how to meet it. Some whispers go even further, suggesting that the archives contain accounts of moments when humanity narrowly avoided catastrophe, learning from mistakes that future generations would never know occurred. Letters describing wars halted by diplomacy, inventions abandoned after near disaster, or ideological movements softened by spiritual intervention. These stories paint a picture of a world repeatedly pulled back from the brink. Not because of divine intervention alone, but because individuals, institutions, or communities recognized patterns and acted decisively. The Vatican, privy to these stories, may have become a custodian not only of memory but of caution. Yet the idea that the archives could function as a roadmap of the future poses an unavoidable question. Why keep such knowledge secret? The answer, according to rumor, lies in the Church's long-standing understanding of human psychology. Knowledge of impending crisis can inspire preparation, but it can also incite panic, fatalism, or destructive behavior. Institutions across history have wrestled with the danger of revealing too much too soon. The Vatican, with centuries of experience in managing communal fear, may have chosen silence as the lesser risk. Not because humanity cannot handle the truth, but because humanity often misuses the truth, bending it toward fear or power rather than wisdom. Whether these whispers hold any literal truth matters less than what they reveal about the human condition. They expose our longing for certainty in uncertain times, our desire to believe that someone, somewhere, possesses the answers. They reflect our fear that history may repeat itself in ways we are unprepared to confront. And they reveal our suspicion that powerful institutions, by virtue of their longevity, may see patterns invisible to the rest of us. Perhaps the real secret of the Vatican archives is not that they contain a roadmap of the future, but that no such map can ever be complete. The future is shaped not only by cycles and patterns, but by the unpredictable choices of billions of individuals. And yet, the archives remind us of something crucial. While the future is unwritten, it is not unprecedented. Others have walked similar paths. Others have faced similar crises. Others have stood at the brink and wondered whether their world was ending or beginning anew. In this light, the Vatican archives symbolize a profound and humbling truth: that humanity is part of a much larger continuum, a story stretching back into forgotten ages and forward into possibilities we cannot yet imagine. They remind us that history is not a straight line, but a spiral, rising, falling, repeating, evolving. They show that the forces shaping our world today, technology, belief, conflict, imagination, have appeared in many forms before. And if the past holds patterns, then understanding those patterns may be our best hope for navigating what lies ahead. The rumors surrounding the archives persist because they resonate with something deep within the human psyche. The yearning to believe that somewhere, behind locked doors or buried beneath centuries of dust, lies a truth capable of anchoring us in turbulent times. Whether the Vatican holds that truth literally or symbolically is beside the point. What matters is the recognition that humanity must learn from its past if it hopes to shape its future. Perhaps the archives do not contain answers, only warnings. Perhaps they do not hide prophecy, only memory. Or perhaps, in their silent accumulation of human experience, they hold something far more valuable: the reminder that we are not the first to face uncertainty, and we will not be the last. And so the final whisper fades, leaving us with a vision of the archives not as a chamber of secrets, but as a testament to humanity's enduring quest for meaning. A quest that spans continents, conflicts, civilizations, and centuries. A quest still unfolding in our time, still shaping our future, still urging us to look back, listen closely, and remember. For if there is one truth the Vatican Archives may ultimately reveal, it is this: the past is never truly past. It lives in echoes, in patterns, in warnings, and in the choices we have yet to make. And in understanding that truth, we may yet discover how to navigate the turning point that lies ahead.